Chapter 1539. Above the cliff, several golden-crowned python condors were circling in the air, letting out sharp cries. One of them had a wingspan of more than 10 meters, and its feather crown was a resplendent gold. Its feathers were also pure gold, and it had a thick tail that looked like a python's. Its fingernail-sized golden scales flickered with light. At the end of its tail was the head of a python. Its golden eyes were cold and emotionless, causing people to shudder. This was the largest golden-crowned python condor. It was emitting a powerful aura that was terrifying. It had reached the peak of a 6-star martial saint. This golden-crowned python condor was the king of this group, the golden-crowned python condor king. As the king of a race, the golden-crowned python condor king had terrifying strength. At the peak of a 6-star martial saint, it was comparable to an ordinary 7-star martial saint. At this moment, a figure was standing on the back of the golden-crowned python condor king. This person was wearing a starry robe that fluttered gently in the wind. The stars on the robe were like the stars in the sky, fluttering on the robe. It looked extremely beautiful and shocking. He held a sword in his left hand, and his right hand was hanging naturally. He stood upright, like a divine sword pointing to the sky. Chu-Mu had subdued the golden-crowned python condor king. Subduing the golden-crowned python condor king was equivalent to subduing the entire golden-crowned python condor king. Chu-Mu didn't subdue the golden-crowned python condor king with his own strength. This was a super-powerful spirit beast that was comparable to an ordinary 7-star martial saint. No matter how powerful Chu-Mu was, he wouldn't be able to contend against it. However, this was the profound sun world, and Chu-Mu was the master of the profound sun world. He realized that the strength of his primordial spirit had an obvious advantage in the profound sun world. Originally, he could fight against a 7-star martial saint in the profound sun world. After his primordial spirit reached the second level, he could use the power of the profound sun world to suppress an 8-star martial saint. The strongest spirit beast in the profound sun world was only at the peak of a 6-star martial saint. Unsurprisingly, the golden-crowned python condor king was subdued by him. The process wasn't difficult. Standing on the back of the golden-crowned python condor king, Chu-Mu looked down at the profound sun realm. Soon after, he raised his head and looked at the sky. His gaze turned deep. Now that I have made a breakthrough in my cultivation, there is nothing important for me to do in the profound sun world. Why don't I leave the profound sun world and return to the ancient sacred city? With my current strength, I should be able to obtain more opportunities. Chu-Mu thought to himself. Immediately after, the sky of the profound sun realm started to change. Red clouds started to surge and the sky started to distort. The center of the sky started to collapse like a vortex. The earth was also distorted by the collapse of the sky. In the next breath, Chu-Mu's figure disappeared. Somewhere in the ancient sacred city, a figure seemed to leap out of the void. It was Chu-Mu. A ruby-like bead the size of an egg was spinning in his hand. This perfect ruby-like bead was none other than the profound sun world. The boundary steel was refined by Chu-Mu, which allowed him to shrink the profound sun world. The advantage of doing so was that the profound sun world was very small and could be carried around. The disadvantage was that Chu-Mu couldn't bring anything out of the profound sun world, such as the spiritual beasts. If he wanted to get the spiritual beasts out, he would first have to restore the profound sun world to its original state. The baleful blood aura in the ancient sacred city was still as dense as before. Chu-Mu looked at his surroundings and tried to distinguish it. The closer he was to the center, the stronger the baleful blood aura was. The slight difference allowed Chu-Mu to distinguish the direction to the center of the ancient sacred city. Forward. Originally, when Chu-Mu broke through to the 9th heavenly layer of nirvana, his spiritual energy could cover a radius of 100 meters in the ancient sacred city. After passing the eternal tribulation, His primordial spirit would grow stronger and his spiritual energy would also increase by leaps and bounds, allowing him to cover a radius of 1,000 meters. But now, when Chu Mu's spiritual energy spread out, it covered a radius of 10,000 meters because his primordial spirit had reached the second grade. It didn't consume much energy to cover a radius of 10,000 meters. This allowed Chu Mu to have a better grasp of his surroundings. In terms of the strength of his primordial spirit, he wasn't any weaker than a 4-star saint expert. In terms of the strength of his spiritual energy, it was even stronger than a 4-star saint expert. It was comparable to a 5-star saint expert. Everything within a 10,000-meter radius was under his control. Perhaps it was because they had stayed in the profound sun world for a long time. Most people had already gone deeper into the ancient sacred city. Now, wherever Chu Mu passed by, it was as if they had been ransacked. He couldn't find anything valuable. Chu Mu could only increase his speed and move forward. Not long after, Chu Mu felt a malicious gaze on him. Following the gaze, he saw a figure running towards him at an extremely fast speed. A surge of killing intent locked onto Chu Mu from afar. This aura gave Chu Mu a familiar feeling. It was as if he had encountered it somewhere before. Ha 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 ha, the heavens have eyes. I actually met you here. A piercing laughter rang out. Chu Mu recalled that the other party was the one who had used the name of the imperial court to recruit him in the genius small world. The price was to give him the deep blue divine pearl. He was a 5-star saint expert. Through the aura, Chu Mu determined that the other party was still a 5-star saint. However, he was much stronger than before. Obviously, he had obtained some benefits in the ancient sacred city. In the blink of an eye, Lan Yu closed in on Chu Mu. Back in the genius small world, Lan Yu had failed to entice him. In the end, he was injured by a high-level saint expert. Without recuperation, he wouldn't be able to recover. At that time, he had indeed spent a lot of time and consumed a lot of medicinal pills to recover from his injuries. Because of this, he bore a grudge against Chu Mu. He also bore a grudge against the high-level saint expert who had injured him. If he had enough strength, he would definitely take revenge. However, it wasn't that easy to break through to the high-level saint realm. When the ancient sacred city descended, he felt that this was an opportunity for him to become stronger. Therefore, he entered the ancient sacred city. With his strength as a mid-level 5-star martial saint, although he encountered some dangers, he was able to overcome them. He obtained some treasures and had a small breakthrough in his cultivation, reaching high-level 5-star martial saint and becoming stronger. Unexpectedly, he actually met Chu Mu. You actually broke through to the eternal ancient realm. It seems like you obtained a lot of benefits in the ancient sacred city. However, everything will be for naught. A mere early first heavenly layer of the eternal ancient realm is nothing more than an ant in my eyes. Lan Yu approached Chu Mu while releasing his killing intent. Attacking Chu Mu verbally made him feel extremely carefree. He had an urge to vent the hatred in his heart. Even if you obediently hand over the divine bead, I won't let you off easily. I'll torture you to death to vent the hatred in my heart. Inside the ancient sacred city, the baleful blood qi was incomparably dense. The negative emotions in a person's heart would be magnified unknowingly. The greater the negative emotions, the greater the fluctuations, and the greater the amplification. If it reached a certain level, it could even cause a person to lose their rationality. Lan Yu hadn't lost his rationality yet, but the hatred in his heart for Chu Mu continued to grow, transforming into killing intent. A blood-red aura surrounded him as the baleful blood qi was attracted to him. Chu Mu didn't expect to meet such a powerful enemy not long after he left the profound sun world. Lan Yu was a 5-star high-level Saint Realm expert, while he was merely a 1-star low-level Saint Realm expert. How big was the gap between the two? A gap of 4 heavenly layers and 2 minor realms. This was a gap that would make one despair. Moreover, there was also the gap between low-level Saint Realm and mid-level Saint Realm. If it was someone else, they would only have two choices in front of such a gap. One was to turn around and run as fast as possible. Of course, whether they could escape was one matter. The other was to wait for death. 4 heavenly layers and 2 minor realms, and the gap between low-level Saint Realm and mid-level Saint Realm. Even some monstrous geniuses would be helpless in front of such a huge gap, unless they used their trump cards. Chu Mu didn't turn around and run. He wasn't afraid of waiting for death either. A smile appeared on his face, and gradually, it turned into excitement. When he was at the peak of the 9th heavenly layer of Nirvana Realm, he could fight and kill a peak 3-star Saint Realm expert. Then, after breaking through to the Eternal Ancient Realm, he should be able to fight and kill a peak 4-star Saint Realm expert. However, his primordial spirit had reached the peak of 2nd grade, and he had condensed the Eternal Star's pure Yang Spirit Sword Saint Physique. The divine Desolate Sword essence had also become more powerful than he had expected. Therefore, Chu Mu wasn't clear about his current strength. He needed a strong enemy to test his theory. Lan Yu, who was charging at him with murderous intent, was undoubtedly a good candidate. A 5-star high-level Saint Realm expert. Let's fight. The blood in Huang Xiaolong's body began to boil and flow faster. Powerful energy surged in his body, rushing to his limbs and bones. Facing the rapidly approaching Lan Yu, Chu Mu's 2 feet fiercely stomped on the ground. With a boom, the ground under his feet shattered. Amidst the flying dust, Chu Mu's body was like an arrow leaving the bow. With a shocking speed, he instantly shot out. This kind of speed was not something a 1-star Saint Realm expert should have. Even a 2-star or 3-star Saint Realm expert couldn't achieve this kind of speed in an instant. Lan Yu was also shocked by Chu Mu's sudden burst of speed. But at this time, the killing intent in his heart was soaring, and he didn't have the time to think. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill Chu Mu to vent the hatred in his heart, then snatch the deep blue divine pearl. Unsheathing the heaven-beheading sword, Huang Xiaolong slashed forward, forming a crescent-shaped sword light. As if it was forged from metal, it emitted a chilling cold light, slicing through space in front of Lan Yu. The shocking coldness and sharpness made Lan Yu shudder in fear, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Die! Lan Yu wanted to end this battle as soon as possible to avoid any unexpected complications. His palm shot out, turning into a giant palm, slamming towards Chu Mu. Even a mountain would crumble under his palm. In the blink of an eye, the crescent-shaped sword light collided with the giant palm. Chapter 1540. Break. A ferocious grin appeared on Lan Yu's face. It was as if he could already see his palm strike, shattering the sword light and shattering his opponent's body into pieces. Imagination was beautiful, but reality was cruel. The giant palm and the sword light collided in an instant. The giant palm didn't shatter the sword light as it wished. Instead, it clashed with the sword light. Both sides stopped in midair, equally matched. This is impossible! Lan Yu shrieked. He was a 5-star Saint Realm expert, and a 5-star Saint Realm expert at that. On the other hand, his opponent was merely a 1-star Saint Realm expert who had just broken through. The sword light and the giant palm collided. The sword light cut into the giant palm bit by bit. Chu Mu leaped over the sword light and stabbed his sword towards Lan Yu. A sword appeared in Lan Yu's hand. He swung it, and the sword light was like a rainbow piercing through the sun, blasting towards Chu Mu. Then, he formed a seal with his left hand and an ice storm rolled out. He didn't show any mercy. Every move was to kill Chu Mu. Facing Lan Yu's merciless attack, Chu Mu didn't show any fear. His expression was calm, but there was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. The golden-red blood in his body was as thick as magma, flowing in his veins, bringing powerful energy to his saint body. The sword light was sharp, and it cut the ice storm in half. His body twisted in midair, and with a mysterious technique, He dodged Lan Yu's sword light and quickly closed in. Close combat had always been Chu Mu's forte. Facing a strong opponent like Lan Yu, whose cultivation was much higher than his, Chu Mu wouldn't be so stupid to give up his strength to fight with his opponent. Making up for his shortcomings and magnifying his advantages was the right way to go. As Lan Yu closed in, swoosh, 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 dozens of sword lights rained down on Lan Yu, leaving him nowhere to dodge. With a slash of the sword light, an arc-shaped light shield appeared around him, forcibly blocking the bombardment of the storm-like sword light. Layer after layer of ripples, the light shield shattered, and the sword light also dissipated. Lan Yu raised his left palm and pushed it forward. A rumbling sound rang out, as if it was capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas. A terrifying aura swept out, rushing towards Chu Mu. In an instant, Chu Mu felt as if he was facing a riot of a vast ocean. In front of nature, humans seemed so small. However, Lan Yu's attack only carried a trace of ocean-like aura. It wasn't a real ocean, so it wasn't impossible for Chu Mu to resist. The heaven-beheading sword was raised, and a silver light rapidly shot up from the sword guard, displaying the extreme sharpness, and finally condensed at the sword tip. Chop! 9th grade sword energy, slashing sword intent. With a slash of the sword, the earth-shattering power was split into two. A true sword saint relied on his unstoppable sharpness. A single slash of his sword could split everything in the world, regardless of whether it was hard or soft. With a flip of his wrist, the heaven-beheading sword's sharpness was like water. Under the piercing sword intent, the sharpness that could pierce through everything made Lan Yu's pupils shrink. This sword was very powerful, and he didn't dare to take it head-on. Damn it, how can this guy be so powerful? Lan Yu roared in his heart. The difference between a 5-star high-level saint and a 1-star low-level saint was immeasurable. If he wanted to kill Lan Yu, it should be as easy as blowing off dust. Even if Lan Yu was a peerless genius, he would only need to expend a little more energy. It was insignificant. He believed that even a rare monstrous genius who could fight across 1 or 2 heavens couldn't possibly fight across 4 heavens. But what was going on now? How could a 1-star low-level saint be able to fight evenly with a 5-star high-level saint like him? Puzzled, Lan Yu was extremely puzzled. At the same time, he felt a chill in his heart. If such a person with such strength were to mature, he would definitely be a peerless expert in the future. He might even be able to break through to the Saint-Emperor realm. Thinking of this, Lan Yu's heart shuddered. He had already shed all pretense of cordiality with Lan Yu, and there was only a matter of life and death. The stronger Lan Yu was, the more he had to kill him. Otherwise, there would be revenge in the future. His killing intent surged, and it continued to expand under the dense murderous aura of the ancient sacred city. Lan Yu's eyes were filled with a fiendish scarlet. The strength of his attacks increased by 2 notches, and his speed increased as well. This made his attacks even more powerful. In an instant, the pressure on Chu Mu increased a little. Dodging, counterattacking with his sword, fighting in close combat, and withstanding the increased pressure, he was able to advance and retreat freely. Chu Mu's figure moved rapidly around Lan Yu. Although even a 9-star saint couldn't fly in the ancient sacred city, if one's control over their body and strength reached a certain level, they could still fly for a short period of time. Controlling his body and strength wasn't difficult for Chu Mu. With a thrust of his sword, the clouds surged. The sword light was incomparably sharp as it silently pierced towards Lan Yu. Lan Yu only felt a sudden surge of clouds around him, bringing with it a sticky energy that slowed his movements. Then, a highly condensed sword light silently pierced through the clouds and shot towards him. A chill rose from the depths of his heart as Lan Yu felt extreme danger. Ice blue palm. With a furious roar, Lan Yu struck out with his palm. A huge ice blue palm appeared, as if it was formed from 1,000-year-old ice. The palm lines on it were like the cracks of a glacier, clearly visible. The huge ice palm swept through the clouds and was pierced by the sword light of the cloud-piercing sword. The ice blue palm was one of Lan Yu's ultimate technique. It was a powerful close combat ice spell. The blood of those hit would freeze and their bodies would shatter. Even their Yuan spirit would be affected. The ice blue palm focused on attacking from all directions. The cloud-piercing sword was the opposite. It focused on attacking from a single point, condensing all the energy and piercing through. A single point and a single point had their own merit. The huge ice blue palm was pierced through by the cloud-piercing sword. The sword light continued to pierce towards Lan Yu, but the huge ice blue palm didn't disperse. It was still heading towards Chu Mu. Cold chi filled the air. Chu Mu didn't want to be hit. He stopped the cloud-piercing sword and quickly raised the sky-beheading sword. Extreme beheading sword. The sword that slashed down was incomparably sharp. It cut through all toughness, and even ice was not a problem. The ice blue palm was split into two by Chu Mu's sword. They fell to the left and right sides and exploded. Instantly, the ground on both sides was frozen and the ice quickly spread. What sword skill is this? A question flashed through Lan Yu's mind, but it was soon drowned by killing intent. Lan Yu was very strong. The difference between his cultivation and Chu Mu's was too great. Sky-beheading sword. Star-breaking sword. The sky-beheading sword in Chu Mu's hand displayed a powerful sword skill. After passing the Aeon Tribulation and becoming an Eternal Realm Saint, the power of his sword skills had greatly increased. Chu Mu also realized that the sword skills on the Forest of Thousand Sword Steels in the True God Sword Sect's forbidden area, especially the top sword skills, could only be fully displayed by a saint's power. What was a saint's power? A saint's sword soul, saint's sword essence, and saint's sword origin. With these saints' power, the power of the sword skills could only be described as shocking. Icy finger. Lan Yu pointed with both hands and instantly shot out icy blue finger beams towards Chu Mu with a chilling intent. Chu Mu's figure moved at high speed, leaving behind afterimages as he dodged the icy blue light rays. He did not use the sword chi shadow movement skill. The sword chi shadow movement skill was a combination of footwork and movement skill that he had created himself. It was very powerful, especially after his cultivation broke through to the Eternal Realm. The sword chi shadow movement skill had been perfected and became even more mysterious. The icy blue light rays were as dense as raindrops, but they could not hit Chu Mu. The more he could not hit, the more unwilling Lan Yu was. His eyes were red, and he was about to lose his mind. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill Chu Mu. He kept flicking his 10 fingers. Strands of icy blue light pierced through the air and shot out in all directions. They left countless marks on the ground in the distance and spread out, sealing the ground with ice. The cold air was biting cold. God-slaying sword style. Lan Yu only felt that his mind was being attacked, and his actions were slightly delayed. A shocking sword light slashed towards him, causing him to break out in cold sweat. He was almost hit. Lan Yu was shocked and angry. Chu Mu thought, as expected, after becoming a sword saint, the sky-piercing saint sword can't keep up. He believed that every sword saint had the same feeling. Perhaps the sky-piercing saint sword's material was very good, and could withstand the power of a saint without being damaged, but for a sword saint, it could not increase their strength. If a sword saint did not have a sword, they would not be able to use their full strength. There was not much difference whether they had a sword or not. However, not every sword saint could afford to use a spiritual sword. A spiritual sword was very precious. Previously, Chu Mu had been in the profound Sun realm and did not fight, so he did not know the difference. Now that he was facing a strong enemy, he realized that the sky-beheading sword was not enough. Especially when he was stronger, the sky-piercing saint sword's weakness would be more obvious. Since that was the case, he would use a spiritual sword. With a thought, he opened his left hand and grasped the air. A sword appeared in his left hand. The eternal spiritual sword was in his hand. Although the sky beheading sword was not as smooth as before, Chu Mu did not have a second spiritual sword, so he could only use it for now. Lan Yu executed the dual sword art, and his attack power rose sharply. One sword broke through while the other attacked. As Lan Yu dodged, his essential aura shield was cut open. His robe was also torn, and he was almost hit by the sword. Lan Yu was shocked and angry. The scarlet in his eyes receded a little, and he regained some of his rationality. Looking at Chu Mu, who was holding a sword in each hand, Lan Yu made a prompt decision and quickly distanced himself. Almost every sword saint was an expert in close combat. Although Lan Yu also used a sword and practiced sword arts, he was not a sword saint. He cultivated both sword arts and spells at the same time. His strength was mainly in spells, and his sword arts were only supplementary. Although he had mastered some close combat spells, he was still better at long-range spells. Chapter 1541. The advantage of a technique cultivator lay in distance. In the world of technique cultivators, there was a saying that if you could control your distance well, you would be invincible. This saying was a bit exaggerated, but it was also true. It showed the importance of distance for technique cultivators. A cold sword light slashed across, cutting Lan Yu's body into pieces. Countless ice shards flew everywhere. It turned out that it had hit Lan Yu's fake body. Countless ice shards containing incomparably terrifying power shot towards Chu Mu with a purpose. Meanwhile, Lan Yu's true body rapidly retreated like a golden bridge shedding its shell. He retracted his sword and formed a seal with his hands. Two ice spears condensed. As they rapidly rotated, they contained terrifying power and shot towards Chu Mu. The sword light streaked across, forming a circular shape, blocking all the ice shards. The other sword instantly struck out, hitting the tip of the ice spear on both sides, shattering the ice spear. "You forced me to do this," Lan Yu roared. An ice-blue pill appeared in his hand, emitting a terrifying chill. He threw the pill into his mouth and swallowed it. Instantly, a terrifying chill bloomed from Lan Yu's body. As the chill spread, Lan Yu's black hair turned ice-blue. The ice-blue chill around his body surged, forming a layer of frost protection. His aura became even stronger. The air within a few hundred meters was affected. The temperature dropped rapidly. The air was filled with ice shards, and the ground was covered in a layer of frost. This pill had the same effect as a secret technique. Lan Yu had obtained it after entering the ancient sacred city. After consuming it, his potential would be stimulated and he would obtain the power of extreme cold. It was extremely terrifying. Even if he increased the distance between them, Lan Yu wasn't confident that he could kill Chu Mu. In order to be sure, he could only endure the pain and use the secret pill. What a shocking chill! Chu Mu frowned slightly. With Lan Yu as the center, the chill within a few hundred meters was extremely dense. It actually made him feel as if his blood and qi couldn't circulate smoothly. If his blood and qi couldn't circulate smoothly, it would negatively affect his strength. Sword domain. With a thought, a strange power spread out from Chu Mu's body, covering a few thousand meters. After overcoming the Aeon tribulation, Chu Mu's sword domain had become even more powerful. As soon as the sword domain covered the area, the cold air was immediately affected. The originally rapid flow of cold air slowed down by 60% to 70%. Lan Yu was also enveloped by the sword domain, and he immediately felt as if his body was bound by an invisible power. Whether it was his strength or speed, they were both significantly reduced. On the contrary, under the sword domain, Chu Mu's strength and speed had clearly increased. Chu Mu spread his two swords like a pair of wings. He flew through the air and pointed his two swords at Lan Yu. It was a light touch, but it contained a terrifying power that could shatter mountains. Polar snow, mystic ice shield. Lan Yu immediately cast a spell. Under the influence of the secret pill, the spells he cast were all secret pill spells, which were much stronger than ordinary spells. Ice-blue diamond-shaped shields the size of a palm appeared around Lan Yu's body. They slowly rotated to block Chu Mu's dual sword attacks. Polar Snow, Mystic Ice Rupture Finger. Lan Yu used another spell technique. He stretched out a finger, which instantly turned icy blue and became translucent. Frost Chi spread out in all directions. The ice finger pointed at Chu Mu. In front of Chu Mu's eyes, Lan Yu's ice finger seemed to grow larger and larger, filling up his eyes and the entire world. It gave him a feeling that there was nowhere to hide, and that it could freeze everything in the world. The ice finger continued to grow larger and rapidly approached Chu Mu. The cold air was astonishing, and it enveloped Chu Mu's body, causing him to uncontrollably shiver. The flow of his blood almost stopped and was about to solidify. What a terrifying cold air! Chu Mu was shocked. Pure yang. With a thought, Chu Mu's body seemed to be injected with tyrannical power. The power of the divine body was stimulated, and pure yang power emerged from his blood and body. Threads of pure yang red circulated and immediately dispelled the cold air, causing his blood to flow again. The blood that flowed again emitted a layer of halo. Chu Mu's internal organs, blood vessels, bones, muscles, and even his skin emitted a faint red luster like a halo. The pure and vigorous pure yang power was open and aboveboard, and it was impervious to the cold. This was the power of a special divine body. A divine body cast by the chi of heaven and earth was the most ordinary divine body. It did not have any special abilities, and it could not provide any additional help in battle. However, a divine body cast by other powers often had different abilities. Just like now, Chu Mu's divine body was the eternal star pure yang spiritual sword divine body. A divine body cast by 4 different powers had 4 types of powers, and pure yang was one of them. Activating one of the special powers contained in the divine body, pure yang power spread throughout the body, dispelling the cold and darkness. It made the blood flow faster, and brought more power to the divine body. For a physique tempering expert, the increase in strength was more obvious. Under the effects of the pure yang divine body, the power of the extreme ice secret elixir could not pose a threat to Chu Mu. Pure yang power! You cast a pure yang divine body. Lan Yu was shocked. His extreme ice power was very powerful, and ordinary flame power could not resist it. However, pure yang power could resist the extreme ice power. Pure yang extreme slayer sword style. Pure yang flowing slash sword style. Pure yang power was injected into the sword, and the sword slashed. With the addition of pure yang power, the power of the extreme slayer sword style and flowing slash sword style was further enhanced. The 2 swords slashed down in a cross, and a hard and soft sword light slashed down. The mystic ice rupture finger was directly slashed and shattered. Pure yang cloud-piercing sword style. The sword stabbed out, and the surging clouds were dyed with a layer of red. A beam of sword light silently pierced through the clouds and pierced towards Lan Yu with pure yang power. The mystic ice shield was shattered, and the remaining sword light made Lan Yu's expression change. Extreme ice, mystic ice body. Under the spell, the extreme ice power spread out, and Lan Yu's body turned into a mystic ice body, blocking the attack of the cloud-piercing sword style. The cloud-piercing sword style was blocked, and the mystic ice body disappeared. Lan Yu returned to his original state and quickly retreated. Extreme ice, mystic ice explosion. He suddenly pushed out both hands, and a large amount of mystic ice power gathered and rushed towards Chu Mu. The explosion caused a rumbling sound, and the surroundings were filled with mystic ice. The ground was frozen, and mystic ice was everywhere. Under the mystic ice explosion, everything within a few thousand meters was barren, and the ice shook the earth. Pure yang power poured into the 2 swords, and the 2 swords slashed out at high speed. The sword light was densely packed around his body, and not even a drop of water could pass through. The explosive mystic ice power rushed over and bombarded the pure yang sword light, and immediately melted. The mystic ice power's bombardment was very powerful, and Chu Mu was constantly forced to retreat. After the mystic ice's impact, Chu Mu's two swords were covered with a layer of frost. Under the pure yang power, the frost disappeared. Fortunately, he had the pure yang power, or else the two swords would have been covered by the frost, and it would have affected his hands. Chu Mu couldn't help but be glad that his saint body contained powerful pure yang power. But although the pure yang power was powerful, its direct destructive power wasn't that strong. It was only effective against cold and een. Spiritual sword. With a thought, the red halo on Chu Mu's body immediately retracted, and the pure yang power was hidden in his body. Immediately, a new power emerged from his body. That power had an astonishing sharpness, like a treasured sword unsheathed. Its sharpness was shocking, and at the same time, it also had a spiritual nature. The moment this spiritual sharpness emerged, the eternal spiritual sword in Chu Mu's left hand also trembled, and let out a joyful cry. The spiritual sword power in Chu Mu's saint body was brought by the eternal spiritual sword, so it had a very close connection with the eternal spiritual sword. At this moment, when the spiritual sword power was stimulated, the eternal spiritual sword in his hand sensed it. The spiritual sword had a spiritual nature, and it was different from ordinary swords. The saint body's power was different, and each had its own uses. Some powers were suitable for attack, some were suitable for defense, and some were suitable for support. In short, different powers had different uses, and when used in the right place, the power of the power would be fully released. The power of the spiritual sword lay in its destructive power, and in cooperation with the spiritual sword, it made the spiritual sword even more powerful. With a slight shake of his wrist, the eternal spiritual sword vibrated gently. Its clear cry became melodious and high-pitched, and the sword essence soared. Although Chu Mu's saint body had 4 powers, it was his first time condensing a saint body, so he couldn't control all 4 powers at the same time. He could only use one. A second saint body power. Lan Yu's eyes widened in shock. His saint body was just an ordinary saint body, so he envied those who had the saint body power. He didn't expect that the monster in front of him had 2 saint body powers. What he didn't know was that Chu Mu didn't only have 2 types of sacred body powers, but 4. A total of 4 types of sacred body powers. The 2 sacred body powers he displayed now weren't the strongest. Chu Mu wouldn't tell him this. After the power of the spiritual sword was activated, the eternal spiritual sword became even more powerful. It directly broke through and reached the intermediate spiritual sword level. Spiritual swords were divided into low, intermediate, and advanced spiritual swords. The eternal spiritual sword was only a low spiritual sword before, but after going through the Aeon tribulation and being tempered, its spirituality had improved further, almost reaching the peak of a low spiritual sword. Now, with the power of the spiritual sword, it directly reached the intermediate spiritual sword level. An intermediate spiritual sword was naturally more powerful than a low spiritual sword. Spiritual sword, sky-slashing sword style. Spiritual sword, cloud-piercing sword style. Because the power of the spiritual sword had been integrated into the 2 moves, the power of the spiritual sword had increased to an astonishing level, piercing through Lan Yu's defense. With the suppression of the sword realm and the spiritual sword's sharpness, the sword saint's tyrannical attack was enhanced to an astonishing level. Lan Yu was exhausted. Sword God descends. In an instant, Chu Mu activated another secret skill. Sword God descends, 10 times sharper, and a terrifying aura impact, shaking Lan Yu's mind. Spiritual sword, Dao cutting sword style. A new sword style was displayed with the help of the eternal spiritual sword. Lan Yu's mind was shaken, and his spiritual world was impacted. His primordial spirit was shaken, and he could only watch as the sword light slashed down. He desperately used defensive means, but it was all in vain. Chapter 1542. With a flick of his wrist, the sword light bloomed like a flower, hovering in the void for a long time, looking vivid and lifelike. Below the sword, Lan Yu stood quietly with a look of disbelief on his face. A line of blood appeared on the top of his head, extending downwards in a straight line. In the next instant, Lan Yu's body was split into two. The strange thing was, all his blood and internal organs were sealed inside his body, not spilling out because the wound was sealed by the eternal sword intent. Reaching out, Lan Yu's spatial ring fell into Chu Mu's hand. Killing Lan Yu, a 5-star Saint Realm expert, filled Chu Mu with an indescribable excitement. If I had crossed the Aeon Tribulation in the outside world and advanced to the Eternal Realm, my strength definitely wouldn't have improved so much. Chu Mu muttered to himself. Breaking through in the outside world was generally done by absorbing energy from heaven and earth to forge a normal saint body. With better luck, one could forge a stronger saint body. But with Chu Mu's uniqueness, even if he had broken through in the outside world, the saint body he forged wouldn't be a normal saint body, but it definitely wouldn't be the eternal star pure yang spiritual sword saint body. There was still a gap. In fact, from the moment Chu Mu stepped into the eternal holy city, his fortuitous encounter had begun. During the 9th heavens of Nirvana realm, due to the eternal holy city's murderous aura, more of his soul was stimulated. Condensing a primordial spirit brought about a transformation from a sword soul to a sword soul, then the imperishable sword to the eternal sword, and finally the eternal spiritual sword. Condensing a primordial spirit and possessing the eternal spiritual sword, Huang Xiaolong's strength increased. After entering the profound Yang world, he was tempered by pure Yang Qi and pure Yang Qi. His perception and memory were astounding, as well as his solid foundation in swordsmanship. On top of that, he was the first to enter the Boundary Steel Hall, defeating the Heaven Race's monster Tian Daolin, refining the Boundary Steel, and finally taking control of the profound Yang world, becoming the final victor. Then, he crossed the Aeon Tribulation in the profound Yang world's profound Yang Palace, being tempered by pure Yang Qi. His primordial spirit had increased by 1 level, reaching the pinnacle of level 2. One had to know that without a primordial spirit cultivation method, it was very difficult to increase the level of one's primordial spirit. Often, there would be saint-level experts who would be stuck at level 1 primordial spirit for hundreds of years or even longer without being able to break through because they did not have a primordial spirit cultivation method. On the other hand, if one had a decent primordial spirit cultivation method, one's primordial spirit might be able to break through to level 2 in a dozen years. Chu Mu did not have the cultivation method of the primordial spirit, but he was directly tempered by the power of pure yang, the power of light and darkness, the power of the stars, and the effects were very obvious. He directly broke through a level, reaching the peak of level 2. Even his saint body had increased from level 1 to level 2. Furthermore, due to the strength of his saint body, a level 2 saint body was comparable to an ordinary level 3 saint body. In some aspects, it even surpassed an ordinary level 3 saint body. An early first heavenly layer of the Aeon had a peak 2nd level primordial spirit and a special 2nd level saint body that was comparable to a 3rd level saint body. This was simply unheard of. It was also because of this that Chu Mu was so powerful. He was able to fight against a 5-star saint expert as a low-level 1-star saint expert. Chu Mu was very clear about where his strength came from. It was definitely a pie that fell from the sky. He had relied on his innate ability and put it to good use. Combined with his hard work, he had experienced danger after danger, battle after battle, and lingered on the edge of life and death time after time to finally obtain his current strength. Everything was not a fluke. For example, a sophisticated machine must be made up of many parts. If one part was missing, the machine would be incomplete and unable to operate. After burning Lan Yu's corpse, Chu Mu quickly left. The heaven-beheading sword is not that handy. Only a spiritual sword can fully display my strength. Chu Mu thought to himself as he moved forward. If I want to use the dual sword technique, I'll need another spiritual sword. As he pondered, Chu Mu did not let down his guard. His divine sense spread out, covering the surroundings. Any strange movements would be sensed by him, unless it was extremely secretive and exceeded the range of his divine sense. Although I can use a spiritual sword obtained from the outside world, it will still be weaker than a spiritual sword that I nurtured myself. Then, should I use the divine desolate sword seed art again? A thought appeared and circled around Chu Mu's mind. Chu Mu also analyzed the possibilities. When he first obtained the divine desolate sword art, the divine desolate sword seed art did not state that he could only plant one sword. But after planting the sword, Chu Mu understood that it was best to only plant one sword. To plant a second sword would be more difficult and dangerous. If he was not careful, not only would he fail to plant the sword, he would also be heavily injured. The reason for failure, according to Chu Mu's careful analysis, was mainly the endurance of the body and the soul. For an ordinary cultivator, using the divine desolate sword seed art once to plant a sword would reach the limit of their endurance. Therefore, it was impossible to plant a second sword embryo. Otherwise, it would exceed the limit of endurance and lead to serious consequences. Chu Mu analyzed his physique and mental strength. In the end, he confirmed that with his ability, the success rate of planting a second sword embryo was at least 80%. He decided that as long as he had the right materials, he would use the divine desolate sword seed art to plant a second sword embryo and nurture it into a spiritual sword. As for now, he could either use the heaven-beheading sword, which would take a lot of time, or find a new spiritual sword to use first. With that thought in mind, he returned to his previous battle with Lan Yu. A 1-star low-level saint fighting against a 5-star high-level saint, the pressure on Chu Mu was not small. Especially after Lan Yu had consumed the extreme snow mystic elixir and obtained the extreme snow mystic elixir, the pressure increased even further. Even so, Chu Mu could still fight against Lan Yu with 2 swords and his saint physique's power. He could even gain the upper hand, but it would be difficult to kill Lan Yu. At the last moment, Chu Mu suddenly had an idea. After a series of attacks to disrupt Lan Yu's rhythm, he then used the Sword God's Descent secret technique to guide the 10 times sharpness to attack Lan Yu, shaking his mind. Life and death between experts were decided in a single breath. 10 times sharpness, 10 times power of the spiritual sword, Tao beheading sword style, Lan Yu was unable to resist at all. The Sword God's Descent secret technique can have a miraculous effect when used at a critical moment. Chu Mu thought to himself after straightening out his thoughts. The advantage of the Sword God Descent secret technique was that it didn't require any preparation time and could be cast with a single thought. It was extremely fast. Chu Mu had only used it before when his opponent was too powerful and he couldn't fight back. This time, he had a flash of inspiration and suddenly cast it after disrupting Lan Yu's rhythm. He guided the sharp aura that had been amplified by 10 times to attack and then used the ultimate kill. The Sword God's Descent amplifies my strength by 10 times. If the divine armor's transformation is successful, I can increase my strength by 20 times. If I include the Divine Wilderness Origin Unification secret technique, it's a 40 times amplification. Chu Mu calculated silently. With this strength, I can even kill a peak 5-star saint. Facing an ordinary 6-star saint, even if I can't kill him, I can at least put up a fight and have the strength to protect myself. So, the current me already has this kind of strength. Chu Mu couldn't help laughing, but I'm still not strong enough. My path is still very far away. Even so, with his current strength, Chu Mu had more capital to fight for more opportunities. With more opportunities, it meant that one's strength could increase and become stronger. After becoming stronger, one could obtain more opportunities. This was a virtuous cycle. Within 10,000 meters, everything was covered by Chu Mu's divine soul power. Suddenly, Chu Mu's rapidly advancing footsteps stopped, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. Little insects of the human race, encountering me is your greatest misfortune. A royal 4-star saint expert waved his 8 tentacles, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws. On his bald head, his slightly bulging eyes were filled with killing intent. The only thing we can do now is to fight to the death, Gulwankong said calmly. Fight! Yang Zhantian shouted. I hope that Chu Mu can complete his mission. Lien Hongyun also had a rare serious expression on her face. Vacuum! Gulwankong shouted in a low voice. Immediately, slivers of silver light spread out from his body and wrapped around his surroundings. His black hair was also dyed and quickly turned into a faint silver color. However, for some reason, the silver color was very faint, and one could see a mixture of black and white. A mysterious and sharp aura circled around Gulwankong's body, and gradually became stronger. 100 battle! Yang Zhantian roared in a low voice like thunder. A shapeless aura gushed out from his body and turned into battle intent. It lingered in the air and stirred up the wind and clouds. His battle intent was so shocking that even the 4-star saint expert of the royal Zhang clan was shocked. Red Fiend! Lien Hongyun always had a smile on her face, but now there was a trace of killing intent on her face. A red aura gushed out from Lien Hongyun's body and turned into red clouds that circled around her body. Her killing intent was increasing steadily. True Void Sacred Body, 100 Battle Sacred Body, Red Fiend Sacred Body. The power of the Saint Body was activated, and the strength of the 3 of them immediately increased significantly. TSK, all of you have special saint bodies. Killing geniuses of the human race like you will give me a sense of achievement. The 4-star saint expert of the royal Zhang clan laughed weirdly and looked very excited. No one spoke. Gulwankong and the other 2 unleashed their strongest attacks. Vacuum, chaotic space 10 strikes. In an instant, 11 Gulwankong appeared and attacked the 4-star saint expert of the royal Zhang clan from different angles. 100 battle, mountain slash. Yang Zhantian's body seemed to expand, turning into a giant. With a leap, he appeared in front of the 4-star saint-level expert of the royal Zhang clan. He raised his sword high and slashed down with a terrifying momentum that could split mountains and split the earth. Red Fiend, cloud refining 10 strikes. Lien Hongyun naturally used all of her strength. After entering the deep blue world, they all had their own opportunities. Their talents had increased, and their strength had increased. The abilities that they had mastered were also more powerful. The moment the 3 of them used all of their strength, the 4-star saint expert of the royal Zhang clan's face changed. The strength of the 3 humans seemed to have exceeded his expectations. Chapter 1543. Chu Mu's soul power could cover an area of 10,000 meters, which was comparable to a normal 6-star saint. Moreover, his primordial spirit had reached the peak of level 2. In addition, Chu Mu had extraordinary control over his soul power. Hence, under the cover of his soul power, no one, including Gulwankong and the other 2, or the 4-star saint of the Zhang royal tribe, noticed him. I didn't expect to meet these 3 fellas here. Chu Mu approached them silently with a smile on his face. As the saying goes, friendship grows after fighting. Chu Mu and Gulwankong and the other 2 got to know each other after a fierce battle in the Heaven Green list. They became friends after that. Some people knew each other for decades, but their relationship was so shallow that they could barely be called friends. Some people only knew each other for a few days or even just met once, but they could become close friends. Gulwankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lien Hongyun separated after entering the deep blue world. After that, they met up again by chance. After that, they had been working together and developed a high level of chemistry. When they attacked with all their might, they cooperated with each other. The power that they unleashed was actually able to suppress the 4-star saint of the Zhang royal tribe. 11 Gulwankong. Every one of them seemed to be real. Every one of them had tyrannical power. They attacked the 4-star saint of the Zhang royal tribe from all angles. They cooperated perfectly. Yang Zhantian slashed a mountain with his sword. His aura was extremely shocking. Even if it was a mountain, it would be split into two. Lian Hongyun's 10 Tribulations Cloud Sword was strengthened from the 9 Tribulations Cloud Sword. Its power was even more tyrannical. Each of their unique skills combined with their full power. Its power was shocking. Although the 4-star saint of the Zhang royal tribe was at a disadvantage, it was only temporary. Facing the full force of the 3, it quickly adjusted. Its 8 tentacles danced crazily, swinging in the air. Each tentacle contained a terrifying power. Chu Mu quickly approached. He concealed his aura so that he wasn't discovered by the 2 parties. The 3 of them have passed the 10,000 ancient tribulation and are at the 1-star saint beginner level. It seems like they broke through in the ancient sacred city. Gulwankong's saint body is related to the power of space, which can increase the power of space. However, the saint body seems to be incomplete. Yang Zhantian's saint body is closely related to battle intent, but it's not perfect. Lian Hongyun's saint body is somewhat similar to blood qi, but it's different. It's not perfect either. However, these 3 fellas have gained quite a lot of benefits in the deep blue world. Gulwankong's talent was already considered demonic back then. Now that he's even stronger, he's not weaker than the 4 demonic geniuses of the 4 heavens gates. In fact, he might even be stronger than them. As for Yang Zhantian, his talent can be considered to be between the absolute geniuses and demon-level geniuses. But now, he's also a true demon-level genius. Back then, Lian Hongyun could only be considered as an absolute genius, but now, she's also a demon-level genius. Chu Mu stared at the 3 of them. He didn't attack immediately. Instead, he observed them carefully. It had been a few years since they last met. Hence, he wasn't clear about what had happened to each other. However, after seeing the cultivation and the strength that the 3 of them displayed, Chu Mu had a more intuitive judgment. Since Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun have both become demon-level geniuses, then Qin Aoxian, who was originally a demon-level genius, would definitely improve if she didn't die. If the top 10 on the Heaven Genius list didn't die, they might all become demon-level geniuses. The thought flashed through his mind. However, it was just Chu Mu's guess. He would only know if it was true when he saw it with his own eyes. If they really became demon-level geniuses, then the potential of the human tribe in the ancient god world would increase further. Thinking of this, Chu Mu couldn't help but think of the deep blue world. It was definitely a mysterious world that could increase one's talent to such an extent. The strength that Gulwankong, who was a beginner 1-star saint, displayed was enough to fight against a normal 3-star saint. The strength that Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun displayed was also enough to fight against a beginner 3-star saint. With the 3 of them working together, their combat strength increased tremendously. They were able to fight against a normal 3-star saint at the pinnacle. However, their opponents weren't normal 3-star saint. They were 4-star saint experts from the Zhang royal clan. Even though they were only beginner 4-star saint experts, they still had the strength to kill a normal 3-star saint at the pinnacle. The reason why they were at a disadvantage was that they didn't expect Gulwankong and the other 2 to be so powerful. After adjusting themselves, they immediately used their overbearing strength to disrupt Gulwankong and the other 2's teamwork. As the tentacles swung out, they became huge. The roaring sound was extremely sharp. It made one's scalp tingle. Under the absolute difference in strength, all techniques seemed so insignificant. Yang Zhantian was directly hit by one of the tentacles. His body trembled violently. He flew backward like a cannonball. Blood spurted out from his mouth. With a loud boom, Yang Zhantian's strong body crashed into a half-collapsed wall a few hundred meters away. The wall was smashed into pieces. He fell to the ground and couldn't get up. Lian Hongyun wasn't any better. She was directly hit by one of the tentacles. Her entire body was curled up. Her eyes were popping out. She kept spitting out blood. It was obvious that she was severely injured. As the giant tentacles fell, Gul Wankong was smashed into pieces one by one. When it came to his real body, his body blurred. He flashed and dodged the tentacles. With a loud boom, the ground cracked. A crack appeared and spread rapidly. Forcefully dodging the tentacles consumed a lot of Gul Wankong's energy. His face was pale. Even though the three of them were monstrous geniuses and their combined strength was comparable to a normal 3-star saint at the pinnacle, it was still too much for them to fight against a 4-star saint. With one attack, Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun were severely injured. They lost the ability to fight. Even though Gul Wankong could still fight, he was no match for them. Even so, Gul Wankong didn't have any thoughts of giving up. Even if he had to die, he would die fighting. Yang Zhantian gritted his teeth. His face was ferocious. He kept gathering his strength and struggled to stand up from the ground. His entire body was shaking, but he still held the sword in his hand tightly. He glared at the 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe. Lian Hongyun fell heavily on the ground. With a loud bang, her entire body was almost buried in the ground. Her muscles were torn and blood spurted out like a fountain. Her injuries were more serious than Yang Zhantian's. After all, Yang Zhantian was also a physique cultivator. His saint body was stronger than Lian Hongyun's. My luck is too good. 3 monstrous geniuses from the human race. The 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe laughed weirdly. Killing monstrous geniuses gives me a great sense of achievement. As he spoke, the 8 tentacles returned to their original shape. They continued to stab forward. There was a sharp sound in the air. Only Gul Wankong was left. His face was pale, and his strength had decreased a lot. The 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe didn't kill him immediately. Instead, he wanted to play with him. A monstrous genius from the human race. Although the human race wasn't as strong as the sea race, they were still monstrous geniuses. The satisfaction of killing a monstrous genius was unimaginable. If it wasn't for the fact that the situation didn't allow it, he wanted to capture the 3 monstrous geniuses and torture them slowly. Since he couldn't bring them back, he could only kill them. However, if he killed them too quickly, it wouldn't be satisfying enough. As an ordinary saint from the Zhang royal tribe, he knew the difference between an ordinary saint and a monstrous genius. It was an insurmountable gap. It was inevitable that he would have some extreme thoughts in his heart. Gul Wankong wouldn't give up easily. Facing the attacks of the 8 tentacles, he waved his sword to dodge and counterattack. However, he was still hit. He kept retreating. Monstrous geniuses from the human race. Is this all you've got? I'm so disappointed. A weak race will always be a weak race. Even monstrous geniuses are just SOSO. The 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe mocked Gul Wankong as he attacked. Gul Wankong's face was pale, but his eyes were filled with killing intent. He stared at the Zhang royal tribe. The intense killing intent made the Zhang royal tribe feel cold. What an annoying gaze. Go to hell. The 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe seemed to have recalled some bad memories. He was so angry that he attacked heavily. One of the tentacles stabbed towards Gul Wankong's head like a sharp sword. Gul Wankong couldn't dodge at all. He could only watch as the tentacle pierced through his head. Dodge. Yang Zhantian steadied himself and used the last of his strength. He shouted as he slashed out with his sword. The sword light pierced through the air. However, it was too late. Lian Hongyun, who supported half of her body, was covered in blood. Her eyes were filled with despair. At this moment, when she was about to die, a sword light seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was like a crescent moon. It shot towards the 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe. His expression changed. That sword light made him feel danger. The tentacles that were stabbing towards Gu Luankong were immediately retracted. The 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe quickly retreated. He cast a sea spell to form a water screen to block the crescent moon sword light. Suddenly, the clouds and mist surged and spread out, enveloping everything within a radius of several thousand meters. Within the clouds and mist, everyone felt as if their bodies were enveloped by an invisible force, becoming sticky and sticky. A beam of sword light appeared silently. It pierced through the clouds and passed by Yang Zhantian's eyes at an unimaginable speed. It passed by Lian Hongyan's head and Gu Luankong's eyes. It pierced towards the 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe. Cloud-piercing sword style. A sword piercing through the clouds. The silent and highly condensed sword light could not be dodged by the 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe. He also could not resist it. Even if he condensed his 8 tentacles in front of him and merged them with the sea water to form a rotating shield, he still could not block it. Under the sword light of the cloud piercing through the clouds, the shield was pierced through silently. The sword light disappeared. The clouds and clouds also disappeared. There was a hole in the center of the shield that the 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe had condensed. The shield fell apart and revealed the body of the Zhang royal tribe. There was a hole in between his eyebrows. His eyes were blank and filled with shock. A figure was standing in front of the 4-star saint from the Zhang royal tribe. His back was facing Gu Luankong, Lian Hongyun, and Yang Zhantian. That figure was standing in the sky and looked somewhat familiar. Chapter 1544. Somewhere in the ancient sacred city, the ground was cracked and the walls had collapsed. Lin Fan flicked his finger 3 times and 3 rays of green light shot out from his fingertip towards Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun. This was the power of life which could heal injuries. Gu Luankong's injuries were light, Yang Zhantian's injuries were second, and Lian Hongyun's injuries were the most serious. As the 3 rays of life force entered their bodies, a cooling sensation spread throughout their bodies, making them feel so comfortable that they closed their eyes. Every time the life force circulated, the pain in their bodies would lessen a little. When the life force was used up, their injuries were greatly improved, turning from serious injuries to light injuries. Chu Mu flicked out another 3 streams of life force into the 3 people's bodies. This life force was extracted from the wood aspect in his heart. After 6 rays of life force, the wood aspect dimmed a little, indicating that it had used up a lot of life force. Luckily, with 2 rays of life force each, their injuries were quickly healed. In the end, they were almost fully healed. Done. Lian Hongyun jumped up and landed on the ground. He stretched his limbs and was very happy and excited. Chu Mu, you are indeed powerful. Not only are you strong, but you also have such a fast healing method. You brat, I thought I could catch up with you. Who knew that I would fall behind? Yang Zhantian shook his head and sighed. That monster in the small world of geniuses is you, right? Gu Luankong smiled and said. Even though he was shocked, he still looked indifferent. Didn't you guys have a lot of fortuitous encounters as well? Of course, I won't be bad. Chu Mu smiled and said. Meeting an old friend, especially in a foreign land, was a very warm feeling. Therefore, he spoke casually. I thought that if you received the news about the arrival of the ancient sacred city, you would definitely come. Now I finally get to see you. Lian Hongyun smiled and said, but I didn't expect that it would be under such circumstances. It's so embarrassing. I say, how strong are you now? Take a guess. Chu Mu looked at Lian Hongyun. Under his hopeful gaze, he said 2 words that almost made him explode. However, since Chu Mu didn't say anything, they didn't intend to ask. Chu Mu, since we came to the deep blue world, we have gained something. If we want to find the center of the deep blue world and the spirit of the world, it might be related to the 18 godly pearls. Gu Luankong changed the topic. Did you find the deep blue divine pearl? Chu Mu asked. When they heard Chu Mu mention the deep blue sacred pearl, Gu Luankong and the other two knew that Chu Mu knew about it as well. I got one, but I don't know where the remaining 17 are. I have 3, said Chu Mu. The 3 of them instantly opened their mouths wide, their faces full of astonishment. The 3 of them had obtained 1 deep blue divine pearl, and the process was extremely difficult. There was also a large element of luck involved, but Chu Mu had actually obtained 3, which made them sigh with emotion. However, it was still a good thing. Then we have 4 deep blue divine pearls. I wonder if the others have obtained any? Gulwankong quickly calmed himself down and said. The others referred to the other swordsmen who entered the deep blue world. This was an unknown factor, because it was still unknown how many people had survived. There were only 18 deep blue divine pearls. Some of the experts in the deep blue world, or some of the organizations, such as the Imperial Court, had been trying their best to collect the deep blue divine pearls. There must be more than 1 deep blue divine pearl in the Imperial Court. Since Chu Mu found out about the Imperial Court, he knew how difficult it was to collect the deep blue divine pearls. Perhaps he might not even succeed. This was a gamble for the various tribes in the ancient god world. After all, the resources in the ancient god world were almost depleted. They could only focus on finding a new star region or world to obtain more resources to develop. Since they had discovered the deep blue world, they naturally wouldn't let it go. The 4 of them chatted for a while. Gu Luankong and the other two's injuries were finally healed and their strength was restored. Chu Mu, I'll leave the divine pearls to you. Gu Luankong took out a deep blue divine pearl and quickly passed it to Chu Mu. Chu Mu was slightly stunned. He immediately took the deep blue divine pearl and kept it in his personal space. This was a form of trust. At the same time, it was also because Gu Luankong and the other 2 believed that Chu Mu was stronger than the 3 of them combined. It would be safer to leave the deep blue divine pearl with Chu Mu. Now, I plan to go deeper into the ancient sacred city. What do you think? Chu Mu asked. Although the 3 of them weren't weak, they were only in the lower levels of the sacred realm. If they went deeper into the ancient sacred city, they would meet opponents who were at least in the middle levels of the sacred realm. Chu Mu didn't have much confidence in himself, so he didn't care about them. Chu Mu, when we came here, we found an underground palace. However, the puppets inside were very strong and we couldn't fight against them. Hence, we sealed the entrance of the underground palace and planned to go in after we become stronger. Gulwankong said. But now that we have you, the 4 of us might be able to go in together. Lien Hongyun's eyes lit up. Then let's go. Chu Mu smiled. The entrance of the underground palace that the 3 of them found was very hidden. The 3 of them were only able to find it because they were lucky. After they sealed the entrance, no one else found it. This wasn't strange. The ancient sacred city was said to be filled with opportunities. It was just a matter of who could find them. Gu Luankong opened the seal that he set up personally. The entrance appeared in front of Chu Mu and the others. It was very small and they had to go in. After they went in, Gu Luankong set up another seal. He was a freak. Apart from his cultivation and strength, he had also dabbled in the Tao of seals, and his attainments were extraordinary. Once they entered the underground palace, the light was dim. There was only the light from the bright pearl at the top. However, the underground palace was too big. There was only 1 bright pearl that could light up, and the light was very weak. However, the 4 of them were all saint-level experts. They could see the night as if it was day. The dim light didn't affect them much. Once they entered the underground palace, Chu Mu was attracted by the figures standing in the underground palace. There were a total of 18 figures. They were all black as if they were wearing black armor. They were holding black swords in their hands and leaning on the ground. The 18 figures exuded a cold aura, and there was a kind of coldness. These puppets are all 1-star saint-level experts. They are no match for us one-on-one. However, when the 18 of them worked together, even a 4-star saint-level expert might not be their match. Lien Hongyun pointed at the motionless 18 puppets in front of them and said to Chu Mu, "However, seeing you kill a 4-star saint rank in one strike, if the 4 of us work together, we can definitely defeat these 18 puppets." "Then let's do it," Chu Mu said and walked towards the puppets. Once they were within 100 meters of the puppets seemed to be activated and move. As the black shadows flashed, the 18 puppets surrounded Chu Mu and the other 3. Each of the puppets gave out a strong aura. They were all 1-star saint-level experts. The 18 auras were the same. They were connected and combined into one. They attacked and defended as one. Chu Mu immediately saw the secret of the 18 puppets. The 18 puppets were not strong individually. However, when they worked together, the 18 auras would be divided into 18 parts. The power would be greatly reduced. They could indeed kill a 3-star saint-level expert. However, this was not considered strong to Chu Mu. He unsheathed the heaven-sword and slashed out. A shocking sword light tore through the sky and slashed at one of the puppets. The puppet was not slow. However, Chu Mu's sword was faster. When the sword hit, the power was divided into 18 parts. The 18 puppets shared the power. This was just a normal sword. It was not a sword technique. "Very strong defense," Chu Mu said and slashed out again. This slash made Gu Luankong and the other 2 tremble. Extreme sword style. Everything hard would be cut apart by the sword. The extreme sword style was very powerful. Even a 5-star saint-level expert would not dare to take it head-on. Even though it was divided into 18 parts, the power was not something the puppets could withstand. With a cracking sound, a crack appeared on the bodies of the 18 puppets. However, puppets were not humans. Even if they were injured, they would not lose their ability to fight. When Gu Luankong and the other 2 saw Chu Mu injure all 18 puppets in one strike, and the wounds on their chests were obvious, they were all dumbfounded. How powerful was this attack? Their defense is indeed strong. Chu Mu nodded. He dodged the counterattack of the puppets and slashed out. In an instant, 18 sword light pierced out like shooting stars. All puppets had a core. Chu Mu had already found the core of the puppets with his divine sense. The 18 sword light attacked the core of the puppet. Suddenly, the 18 puppets could not move. Lien Hongyun and the other 2 were stunned. They were prepared to fight the puppets. However, they were easily defeated by Chu Mu. However, this was a good thing. The 18 puppets with their cores destroyed were not very valuable. After all, Chu Mu and the other 2 did not know how to repair the puppet. However, they were still puppets from the ancient times. The 4 of them divided them up. Chu Mu contributed the most. He got 6 puppets. Gu Luankong and the other 2 got 4 each. After the 18 puppets were collected, the entire underground palace was empty. The 4 of them spread out and searched carefully. Their divine sense spread out. They did not find anything. However, they found a hidden door. After a round of inspection, they cracked the door. After opening the door, the 4 of them entered the next underground palace. The second underground palace was as spacious as the first. There were also puppets. However, instead of 18, there were 15. The 15 puppets stood motionless. They were standing in a different position from the 18 puppets in the first underground palace. It seemed to be more mysterious. Chu Mu walked closer. When he was 100 meters away, the 15 puppets were all activated. A powerful aura spread out from their bodies. That was the aura of a 2-star martial saint. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 15 2-star martial saint puppets surrounded Chu Mu and the other 3. Chapter 1545. Surrounded by the 15 puppets, Gu Luankong and the other 2 looked very serious. It seemed like there were 3 fewer puppets than before, but every single one of them was stronger than the previous ones. They were all 2-star saint-level puppets. The formation that they were standing in was even more intricate than the 18 puppets in the first underground palace. Hence, they knew that the puppet formation this time would be even stronger. They were already unable to fight against the first puppet formation. Needless to say, they were also no match for the second puppet formation. They could only depend on Chu Mu. Despite being surrounded, Chu Mu didn't show any nervousness or seriousness. His powerful soul power spread out and covered the entire area. The 15 puppets were all included in the range of his soul power, and he carefully observed them. The 15 two-star saint-level puppets moved. They drew their swords and attacked. Whether it was Chu Mu or Gu Luankong and the other two, they were all attacked. Chu Mu moved his feet and dodged the attacks as if he was taking a stroll. Gu Luankong and the other two worked together to block the attack. They did not fight back because they knew that with their abilities, it would be useless even if they fought back. There was no point in wasting their energy. Dodging and blocking the attacks of the puppets had already forced them to give it their all. Chu Mu also knew that although the three of them were very talented, their cultivations were still too low. They could not be compared to him. They must be under a lot of pressure. Hence, he swung his sword light and slashed through the sword light. Instantly, many of the sword lights were destroyed and the pressure on Gu Luankong and the other two was relieved. Since there was a second underground palace, it was likely that there would be a third or fourth underground palace as well. Based on the difference between the first and second underground palaces, there would be fewer puppets in the third underground palace, but they would be more powerful. If there was a third or fourth underground palace, or even more underground palaces, Chu Mu would have to think further. Hence, he was studying the puppets' formation. The formations of the puppets in the second underground palace were very similar to the formations of the puppets in the first palace. They could be said to be of the same origin. Back in the first underground palace, he didn't think too much and directly defeated the puppets with his strength. He didn't study the formations. This time, Chu Mu felt that he could also break through the cores of the 15 puppets with his powerful strength. However, if there was a third underground palace and his guess was correct, he was afraid that he would not be able to pass through the third palace. The better way was to break the formation. Only by breaking the formation would one be able to go further. Understanding this, Chu Mu continued to wander around, neutralizing the attacks of the 15 puppets. He used the power of his soul to observe carefully with his sword intent, studying the mysteries of the array. Chu Mu's attainments in the Tao of Seals were profound. Although he did not deliberately study the Tao of Formations, his understanding of the Tao of Formations was also extraordinary. Coupled with his astonishing comprehension ability, it didn't take long for him to gradually figure out the mystery of the puppet array. Next, he naturally had to study how to break the formation. Breaking the formation generally consisted of breaking the formation by force and breaking the formation by skill. Breaking the formation by force was to break the formation by force with great strength. This method of breaking the formation did not require studying the formation. As long as one's strength was strong enough, one could break the formation by force. Breaking the formation by skill was to study the formation in depth, understand its mysteries, and study the locations of its node. Then, one could break the formation from the nodes and make the formation unable to operate freely. A moment later, in Chu Mu's spiritual world, he simulated 15 puppets with the power of his soul. They operated according to the positions and movements of the puppets in the outside world. Studying the mysteries of the formation, then simulating and deducing the subsequent progress of the formation required a strong power of the soul, amazing comprehension, and deduction ability. Under Chu Mu's powerful deduction, the subsequent changes of the entire formation were completely revealed. Lines appeared between the puppets and connected. Those were the lines through which the puppets' power flowed. Then, red dots appeared one by one. Those were the nodes through which power flowed. Chu Mu began to counterattack. He attacked with his sword. The heaven/sword stabbed out. He did not use any powerful sword moves. It was just a very ordinary stab. However, it contained level 9 sword power and the true meaning of stab. It was very powerful. Every stab looked like Chu Mu had given up on himself and was randomly stabbing at empty space. It was very confusing. Gu Luankong and the other two sensed that the puppets, who were moving quickly, suddenly stopped. Even their swords paused for a moment. Their power seemed to have dissipated. The aura of the formation around them suddenly became unstable and gradually weakened. They knew that Chu Mu's stab just now was to break the formation. Once the formation was broken, the 15 two-star saint-level puppets were no longer a threat to them. The three of them stared at Chu Mu with a strange look. They were extremely shocked. As a 1-star saint, he had the power to easily kill a 4-star saint. That was not all. Now, he even had great attainments in breaking the formation. How were they supposed to live? Without the formation working, the 15 two-star saint-level puppets were no threat at all. This time, Chu Mu and the others did not destroy the core of the puppet. Instead, they only cut off the energy transmission. The puppets immediately stopped moving. As long as the energy was allowed to flow, the puppets would move again. The puppets whose cores were not destroyed were more valuable than the previous 18 puppet. Forget it. We did not do anything. Yang Zhantian waved his hand. He was not willing to take these puppets. Gu Luankong and Lien Hongyun also had the same thought. Coincidentally, I am in charge of a sect and need to expand. I will take these puppets back and put them in the sect. Chu Mu did not decline. He moved his mind and took the 15 puppets. We all know that. Real sword sect. Lien Hongyun smiled. After passing the second underground palace, the group searched again. They found a hidden door and opened it. They entered the third underground palace. Just as Chu Mu expected, there were puppets in the third underground palace as well. There were 12 of them. If I am not wrong, the puppets in the third underground palace might be 3-star saint level. The formation they form will be even more mysterious. Chu Mu said. The puppet formation in the second underground palace was already able to fight against a 4-star saint level. The puppet formation in this underground palace might be able to fight against a 5-star saint level. Gu Luankong said. The three of us had better stay here obediently. Lien Hongyun shrugged her shoulders and said, I will try first. You guys work together to break the formation from the outside. Chu Mu said. He strode forward. When he was about 100 meters away, the puppets were indeed activated. They released 3-star saint-level energy waves and moved faster. In a flash, they surrounded Chu Mu and started to attack. Chu Mu naturally did not care about the attack of a 3-star saint level. However, under the mysterious formation, the power of the 12 3-star saint-level puppets was connected. When they slashed out with their swords, even a 5-star saint-level expert would have to be careful. Moreover, the puppets were not afraid of pain or fatigue. Even if they were injured, it would not affect them. Unless the circulation of their power was interrupted or their core was destroyed. Chu Mu did not dare to underestimate the attacks of the puppets. However, he did not need to pay too much attention to them either. The reason why the puppet formation in the third underground palace had the power to kill a 5-star saint was not because they were powerful. Instead, it was because 5-star saint-level experts could not do anything to them. Once they were trapped in the formation, they might be tortured to death. Chu Mu was not an ordinary 5-star saint. Hence, he was able to dodge the attacks easily. He dodged again and again. When he could not dodge, he blocked with his sword. However, he did not counterattack. He covered it with his spiritual power and activated his sword of will. He observed, compared, and analyzed carefully. Compared to the puppet formation in the second underground palace, this puppet formation was more mysterious. However, it was still of the same origin. With the puppet formation in the second underground palace as a foundation, it was not difficult for Chu Mu to analyze this puppet formation. After a quarter of an hour, He used his spiritual power to simulate and construct the puppet formation in his spiritual world. He also deduced the subsequent changes of the puppet formation. Power lines appeared and power nodes appeared. These power nodes were fewer than the puppet formation in the second underground palace. The fewer power nodes, the fewer flaws there would be. Moreover, because these puppets moved faster, the power nodes were harder to grasp. However, these were not problems in Chu Mu's eyes. He locked on to the power nodes and grasped the opportunity to strike with his sword. Sword light shot out and cut across the sky, hitting the nodes one by one. When the nodes were attacked, the flow of power was immediately interrupted. The formation could not operate smoothly. The 12 puppets suddenly trembled and their rhythm was disrupted. Seeing this, Chu Mu struck with his sword again. He split his sword into 3 parts and hit the core of 3 3-star saint puppets. He skillfully blocked the transmission of power from the core. The 3 3-star saint puppets immediately stood still. Gu Luankong and the other 2 also grasped the opportunity to strike. Each of them dealt with a puppet. Not long after, the 12 3-star saint puppets were all blocked. Needless to say, the 12 3-star saint puppets were collected by Chu Mu. The third underground palace was about the same size as the first and second underground palaces. When he scanned it with his spiritual power, there was something unexpected. An ancient book was placed on a table in front of him. This book was black and gold in color. It was chilling. On the cover there were 2 ancient words. What do these words mean? Lien Hongyan frowned and asked. These are ancient words. They are similar to modern words. If you look carefully, you might be able to tell, Gu Luankong said. The first word should be break, Yang Zhantian said proudly. The first word is break. The second word is more complicated. It should be puppet of puppet, Chu Mu said. Broken puppet, what a strange name. Broken puppet, as the name suggests, is a broken puppet, Gu Luankong said. They opened the book. There were words and pictures inside. The pictures were very simple, but the words were ancient words. I think this book might be the key to the later underground palaces. We have to decipher it. The 4 surrounded the book and studied it carefully. They tried to decipher the words on it. They analyzed the words one by one and connected them to see the meaning. If there was something wrong, it meant that the translation was wrong. They had to rethink and reanalyze until they got it right. Chapter 1546. As the saying goes, 3 heads are better than Zhuge Liang. Chu Mu and the other 3 weren't cobblers. Each one of them had astonishing comprehension abilities, outstanding talent, and abundant knowledge. Under the efforts of the 4 of them, the ancient characters on the tattered book were translated one by them. We have finally finished translating everything. Lien Hongyun heaved a sigh of relief. She rubbed her eyebrows and sighed in relief. Even with his talent, translating these ancient characters was a very troublesome task. They had never learned the ancient characters and could only rely on their past knowledge to search their memories. Comparing the current characters with some impressions, it was undoubtedly very taxing on their brains. The contents recorded in the tattered book were closely related to the underground palace puppet. It did not mention the origin of the underground palaces, but only introduced them. There were a total of 6 underground palaces. The first underground palace had 18 puppets, all of which had the strength of a 1-star martial saint. After forming a level 1 puppet formation, they had the strength to fight against a 3-star martial saint. The second underground palace had 15 puppets, all of which had the strength of a 2-star martial saint. After forming a level 2 puppet formation, they could fight against a 4-star martial saint. The third underground palace had 12 puppets, all of which had the strength of a 3-star martial saint. After forming a level 3 puppet formation, they could fight against a 5-star martial saint. The fourth underground palace had 9 puppets, all of which had the strength of a 4-star martial saint. After forming a level 4 puppet formation, they could fight against a 6-star martial saint. The fifth underground palace had 6 puppets, all of which had the strength of a 5-star martial saint. After forming a level 5 puppet formation, they could fight against a 7-star martial saint. The 6th underground palace had 3 puppets, all of which had the strength of a 6-star martial saint. After forming a level 6 puppet formation, they could fight against an 8-star martial saint. Chu Mu and the other 3 looked at each other. To be honest, Chu Mu, you can beat the 6th underground palace, right? Lien Hongyun stared at Chu Mu and said, "You think too much." Chu Mu smiled bitterly. Although there were only 3 puppets in the 6th underground palace, each of them had the strength of a 6-star saint. The level 6 puppet array that they formed had the strength to contend against an 8-star saint. Not to mention fighting against an 8-star martial saint, just any one of the 3 puppets was enough to defeat Chu Mu and the others. If it were a one-on-one battle, Chu Mu would still be able to resist and even destroy the puppets in the 5th underground palace. However, when they formed a formation, he was no match for them at all. After all, they were powerful enough to contend against a 7-star saint. Lien Hongyun was also joking. If Chu Mu could really fight against an 8-star saint as a 1-star saint, even if it was just an ordinary 8-star saint, then it could only be said that this world was too ridiculous. "Are we really going to retreat like this?" Yang Zhantian asked, his tone filled with unwillingness. In any case, they had reached the 3rd underground palace and could enter the 4th one. Were they going to stop here? Just thinking about it made him feel indignant. He had gained nothing. "Don't worry, there is more content," Chu Mu said. He continued to read the introduction of the puppets, their attack methods, the location of their cores, etc. There were actually 2 types of puppets. One type was the one that Chu Mu and the others had encountered earlier, the puppets from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd underground palaces. The other type was a puppet that they had not seen yet. It might be at the end. This introduction gave Chu Mu and the others a deeper understanding of the puppet. After that, it was the puppet array. The puppet array was divided into 6 levels. However, this old book only listed the 1st level of the puppet array. To Gu Luankong and the others, this puppet array was not very useful. In other words, they did not gain much after reading it. However, it was different for Chu Mu. He had studied the level 2 and level 3 puppet arrays before, but he had not studied the level 1 puppet array. There were always some gaps. Now it was filled in. In an instant, Chu Mu had a deeper understanding of the puppet array. Finally, there was a move that looked like a secret technique. It was called the Light of Puppet Destruction. After Chu Mu and the others saw it, they were delighted. Light of Puppet Destruction. I see. This is the key to passing through the puppet array. Lien Hongyun said happily. Yang Zhantian and Gu Luankong were also delighted. As the name suggested, the Light of Puppet Destruction was a secret technique that targeted the puppet. After mastering the puppet destruction ray, it would be able to weaken the strength of the puppet upon striking it. The Light of Puppet Destruction was divided into 3 levels, Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3. The Light of Puppet Destruction would weaken the puppet's strength by 10%. The Level 2 Light of Puppet Destruction would weaken the puppet by 20%, and the Level 3 Light of Puppet Destruction would weaken the puppet by 30%. If one mastered the Level 3 Light of Puppet Destruction, they would be able to weaken the puppet by 30%. 30% was a ratio. The stronger the puppet was, the more it would be weakened. Even if it is weakened by 30%, a 6-star saint puppet would still be stronger than a 5-star saint puppet. Gu Luankong frowned. That was true. A 30% reduction was very obvious. However, when the difference in strength was huge, it would not make much of a difference. There should be hope. Chu Mu thought for a while and said. He then started to study it carefully. After a while, I have a guess, but I don't know if it is true. Chu Mu said. The 3 of them looked at him and said, the puppets that form the puppet array must have the same strength. If their strengths are not equal, the puppet array will not be able to operate smoothly. As for whether it is true or not, We will know once we enter the fourth underground palace. However, before we enter the fourth underground palace, we should study the puppet array first. Chumu said, if it is possible, we can form an array to fight against the puppet array. Using an array to break an array. Lien Hongyun nodded seriously. The four of them immediately started to study it. Although it was called studying, it was actually Chumu who was teaching them. After all, Chumu's understanding of the puppet array was much better than theirs. They had all studied battle arrays before. They studied the mysteries of the puppet array, how to fight against it, how to break it, and how to find a battle array that could fight against it. In the end, Chumu and the three of them chose the sword array of the four symbols that Gu Luankong had obtained from a fortuitous encounter. It was much more profound and powerful than the normal sword array of the four symbols. This was a battle array that could be used to attack and defend. The four of them had the same cultivation, but Chumu was the strongest. Therefore, Chumu stood in the Azure Dragon position and was in charge of both attack and defense. Gu Luankong stood in the White Tiger position, Lien Hongyun stood in the Vermilion Bird position, and Yang Zhantian stood in the Black Tortoise position. The three of them were in charge of supporting Chumu. After choosing the battle array, the four of them formed it and started to practice it. The four of them were all monstrous geniuses. They had great comprehension abilities. With hard work, they quickly mastered the sword array of the four symbols. Now, let's practice the light of puppet destruction. Chumu said. He was the strongest. Gu Luankong and the other two didn't like him at the beginning, but now they admired him. Subconsciously, they also saw Chumu as their leader. The sword array of the four symbols had been mastered. All that was left was to practice it in actual combat. They started to practice the light of puppet destruction. The light of puppet destruction was difficult, but it wasn't that difficult either. The key was in one's comprehension ability. That's right, the light of puppet destruction was a secret skill that required a lot of comprehension ability. If one didn't have enough comprehension ability, they wouldn't be able to understand it. Even if someone explained it to them, they wouldn't be able to understand it. However, if one had enough comprehension ability, they would be able to understand it quickly and practice it. In terms of comprehension ability, Chumu was naturally very strong. Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lien Hongyun were all monstrous geniuses as well. Not long after, Chumu was the first to understand it. He started to practice it, followed by Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lien Hongyun. After about an hour, Chumu mastered the level 1 light of puppet destruction. He rubbed his fingers together and a white light shot out. It shot through the void and disappeared. Without a target, Chumu wasn't sure how effective it was. However, this was only the level 1 light of puppet destruction. It wasn't practical enough. He continued to practice it. Chumu started to practice the level 2 light of puppet destruction. Gu Luankong and the other two started to practice the level 1 light of puppet destruction. As time passed, Gu Luankong was delighted. He finally mastered the level 1 light of puppet destruction. Next, he started to practice the level 2 light of puppet destruction. After another 15 minutes, Yang Zhantian and Lien Hongyun also mastered the level 1 light of puppet destruction. Chumu mastered the level 2 light of puppet destruction. Next, it was time to practice the level 3 light of puppet destruction. In the end, Chumu mastered the level 3 light of puppet destruction. Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lien Hongyun mastered the level 2 light of puppet destruction. It wasn't that they didn't want to learn the level 3 light of puppet destruction. It was just that the level 3 light of puppet destruction was too difficult. It would take them a long time to master it. Let's enter the 4th underground palace, Chumu said. They opened a secret door and entered the 4th underground palace. There were a total of 9 puppets in the 4th underground palace. These puppets were different from the puppets in the previous 3 underground palaces. They didn't look as strong, but they were very agile. The swords they used weren't big swords, but long swords. Based on their appearances and the introduction of the Puppet Destruction book, the puppets in the first 3 underground palaces focused on strength. The puppets in the last 3 underground palaces focused on speed. Form the formation, Chu-Mu said. The 4 of them got into position and formed the sword formation of the 4 symbols. They quickly approached the puppets. The puppets were also activated. Their eyes shone with a sharp light as they moved quickly. The level 4 puppet formation was much more intricate than the level 3 puppet formation. The puppets didn't move in all directions. Instead, they attacked Chu-Mu and the others. A level 4 puppet formation formed by 9 4-star saint level puppets was enough to fight against a 6-star saint. If Chu-Mu fought alone, he would only be able to hold on for a short while. However, the sword formation of the 4 symbols formed by the 4 of them was enough to kill a 6-star saint. It was no problem for it to fight against a level 4 puppet formation. A battle formation against a battle formation. Using the opponent's level 4 puppet formation to train their sword formation of the 4 symbols. This allowed them to cooperate better and use their strength more accurately. Actual combat was many times more effective than practice. Not long after, Chu-Mu and the other 3 had a deeper understanding of the sword formation of the 4 symbols. Chu-Mu also further studied the mysteries of the level 4 puppet formation. The lines and nodes of power appeared. However, this time, Chu-Mu didn't break the formation. Instead, he used the light of puppet destruction. With a rub of his fingers, a white light shot out and hit one of the puppets. After the puppet was hit by the light of puppet destruction, its originally fast speed suddenly decreased. Chapter 1547. The 9 puppets moved quickly and attacked with their sword light. Black sword light shot out and attacked the 4 people who were surrounded. Suddenly, one of the puppets slowed down. Under the guidance of the invisible force, the other 8 puppets slowed down. Their attacks were also affected and became scattered. The puppet formation does need puppets of the same strength to be complete, Chu-Mu said. After knowing the result, Chu-Mu launched a counterattack. In a situation where the puppet formation wasn't complete, its effects couldn't be displayed, and its power couldn't circulate. Thus, it became 9 puppets attacking Chu-Mu's group of 4, each fighting for themselves. In such a situation, Chu-Mu alone could pass through, let alone with the formation of 4 people. As the sword formation of 4 divisions was worn out, the power of the formation also became stronger. Under the counterattack, Chu-Mu's sword stabbed out continuously. It was incomparably accurate and hit the core of the puppets, cutting off the power transmission. The 9 4-star saint puppets also fell into Chu-Mu's hands. He collected them and prepared to bring them back to the true sword sect. The 4th underground palace was also empty. They didn't rush to find the door to the 5th underground palace. Instead, they stopped and summarized the previous battle, what they needed to pay attention to, what they could improve, and so on. This allowed the 4 to have a deeper understanding of the sword formation of 4 divisions. Let's try to completely master the sword formation of 4 divisions by the time we reach the 6th underground palace, Chu-Mu said. Completely mastering the sword formation of 4 divisions meant that the sword formation of 4 divisions was complete. Its power would obviously increase by a lot. After discussing and improving, they opened the door to the 5th underground palace and walked in. Sure enough, there were only 6 puppets in the 5th underground palace. However, each puppet had the strength of a 5-star saint. Chu-Mu rubbed his fingers and a white puppet breaking light shot out and hit one of the puppets. He was testing whether it would work after activating the puppet. The sword formation of 4 divisions quickly approached. The puppet formation of the 6 puppets in the 5th underground palace was a 5th grade one. It had the strength to contend against a 7-star saint. It would definitely suppress anyone below that. Fortunately, Chu-Mu and the others had improved their 4 symbols sword formation further. Although they were still no match for a 7-star saint, they were still able to resist for a while. Once the puppets were activated, they moved at lightning speed, forming a puppet formation. Chu Mu knew that his puppet breaking light earlier was not effective. From the looks of it, only after the puppets were activated would the puppet breaking light be effective. As soon as the 6 puppets formed a puppet array, the pressure on Chu Mu's group of 4 suddenly increased. Every puppet's attack power was extremely high. An ordinary 6-star martial saint would not be able to withstand it at all. Under the 4-symbol sword formation, even Chu Mu found it difficult to block and counterattack. Since Chu Mu was under pressure, the other 3 naturally felt even more pressure as well. However, each of them resisted the pressure. Under the intense pressure, the 4 of them constantly discovered the flaws of the sword array of 4 symbols. They quickly adjusted and improved the array, making it even more powerful. Chu Mu also combined the puppet array from before to analyze the level 5 puppet array, studying its mysteries. Under the immense pressure, everyone's improvement in the array was obvious. The depletion of energy was also very shocking. After a while, Gulwankong and the other 2 could not withstand it anymore. Chu Mu quickly released a puppet breaking light, hitting one of the puppets and stopping the level 5 puppet array from working. When it was a level 4 puppet array, Chu Mu could break it with his own ability. However, when it was a level 5 puppet array, he could indeed deduce the energy lines and energy node. However, there were only a few nodes. Moreover, these puppets moved very quickly and the nodes were constantly changing. It was very difficult to grasp. However, it was different with the puppet breaking light. If he used it directly, as long as he hit the puppet, he would be able to weaken the puppet's power. When the level 5 puppet array stopped working, Chu Mu and the rest began their counterattack. As Chu Mu drew his sword, one puppet after another was hit in the core by his sword. They could not move at all. With a wave of his hand, he immediately kept all 6 puppets. In the 6th underground palace, there are only 3 puppets. However, each puppet has the power of a 6-star saint. The level 6 puppet array that they form is able to fight against an 8-star saint. Even if we complete the sword array of the 4 divisions, we will not be able to fight against it. Chu Mu said, therefore we only have one chance. The moment the puppets are activated, shoot out the puppet breaking light and stop them from forming the level 6 puppet array. However, before that, let's upgrade the sword array of the 4 divisions. I feel that the sword array of the 4 divisions has reached a critical point. The 4 of them immediately started practicing again. Their aura was getting stronger and stronger. Suddenly, a dragon's roar came from Chu Mu's body. A green aura seemed to spin from the bottom of his feet. His body shot up into the sky and turned into a green dragon. Then, a tiger's roar that was filled with murderous intent came from Gulwankong. A platinum aura gathered and turned into a white tiger in the sky. Then, the red sparrow and the black tortoise also gathered in the sky above Lian Hongyun and Yang Zhantian. The sword array of the 4 divisions had been completed. The complete sword array of the 4 divisions had obtained the power of the 4 divisions. This caused the power of Chu Mu and the other 3 to increase. After recovering the power of their spiritual bodies and the power of their spiritual bodies, the 4 of them opened the secret door and entered the last underground palace. The 3 puppets stood in front of them, motionless. This time, let's go all out, Chu Mu said. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately performed the Divine Wilderness Restoration secret technique. Ripples spread out and took in the yuan qi of the heaven and earth. Gulwankong, Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun also performed the secret technique. The Divine Wilderness Restoration secret technique increased the power of the sword origin by 10 times. The secret technique that Gulwankong and the other 2 performed also increased their power by 10 times. Under such circumstances, they still could not guarantee that they could fight against the 3 6-star saint-level puppet. It should be known that the level 6 puppet array that they formed was very powerful and could fight against an 8-star saint level. Under the condition that they performed the secret technique and the sword array of the 4 divisions was complete, Chu Mu and the other 3 could only fight against a 7-star saint-level expert. Spiritual sword. With a low shout, a surge of power appeared in Chu Mu's body. It had a spiritual sharpness that surrounded his body. Vacuum. 100 Battle. Red Fiend. Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun also activated the power of their sage bodies. The Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird and Black Tortoise above their heads became more solid because of the power of their sage bodies. They also had a unique aura. The Azure Dragon was more spiritual and had a faint sharpness. The White Tiger was more ethereal and had a terrifying sharpness. The Vermilion Bird had a terrifying murderous aura, and the Black Tortoise was full of fighting spirit. Go! Chu Mu shouted and quickly closed in on the 3 puppets. The 3 puppets were instantly activated. Their eyes shone brightly and they charged towards Chu Mu and the others with shocking speed. In just an instant, the moment the 3 puppets were activated, the level 6 puppet array was formed. The attacks of the puppets reached the level of an 8-star saint-level expert. Sword God's Descent. Light of Puppet Destruction. Instantly, Chu Mu and the other 3 immediately attacked. Chu Mu activated Sword God's Descent secret technique and slashed out with his sword. One slash slashed out and met the attack head-on. He rubbed the 2 fingers on his left hand and cast Puppet Breaking Light towards the puppet. Gu Luankong and the other 2 also cast Puppet Breaking Light towards the puppet. With a 20-fold increase in strength, the power of the sword array of the 4 divisions, the power of the Azure Dragon and the power of the sage bodies, Chu Mu's strength had reached an unimaginable level. However, even with such strength, he still couldn't withstand the attack of the other party. The moment the 2 swords collided, Chu Mu felt an indescribable and terrifying power coming towards him. With a kacha sound, Chu Mu was sent flying backwards. His body trembled violently, and the Azure Dragon above his head instantly dissipated with a sorrowful cry. Blood spurted out from his mouth. With a boom, Chu Mu crashed into the wall, bounced back and landed on the ground. With just one attack, Chu Mu was severely injured. Even so, Chu Mu was still able to stand firmly when he landed on the ground. The life force in his body quickly spread out and healed his injuries. Luckily, he had the support of the sword array of the 4 divisions and the Azure Dragon. Otherwise, that attack might have taken Chu Mu's life. The light of puppet destruction was effective. One of the puppet's strength was weakened by 30%. The level 6 puppet array was broken by itself. Chu Mu moved quickly. Gu Luankong and the others also quickly approached Chu Mu and formed the sword array of the 4 divisions again. The Azure Dragon and the other 3 divisions gathered above Chu Mu and the others' heads. The Azure Dragon looked a little dispirited. Without being able to form a puppet array, the 3 6-star saint-level puppets were not much of a threat to Chu Mu and the others, especially when one of them was weakened by 30%. However, Chu Mu was severely injured and needed some time to recover. Thus, he used the sword array of the 4 divisions to deal with the 3 6-star saint-level puppet. After a while, Chu Mu's injuries were almost healed and he started to counterattack. With a stab, he struck the core of one of the puppets. He injected his power into it and cut off the transmission of power. At this moment, Chu Mu felt the sword in his hand tremble and shatter from the middle. It turned out that the Heaven-slash sword was already damaged when it was struck by the puppet. Now, it could not withstand Chu Mu's power and shattered. The moment the Heaven-slash sword shattered, Chu Mu reacted quickly. With the eternal spiritual sword in his hand, he stabbed towards the second puppet. Fortunately, he did not use the eternal spiritual sword to clash head-on. Otherwise, the eternal spiritual sword might have been damaged. After all, the difference in strength was so great. Not long after, the 3 puppets' transmission of power was cut off by Chu Mu. The battle ended and the sword array of the 4 divisions dispersed. The 4 of them heaved a sigh of relief and panted heavily. This battle was too intense. They had used up all their strength. There was not much energy left in their bodies. We finally passed. Lien Hongyun sat on the ground, not caring about her image. If it wasn't for Chu-mu, we wouldn't have been able to pass the first underground palace. Yang Zhantian panted. This is not my contribution alone. Chu-mu said. What he said was the truth. Without the three of them forming the sword array of the 4 divisions, they would not have been able to pass the underground palace. Chu-mu felt that it was a pity that the heaven/sword shattered. After all, it had been with him for so long. However, it was shattered. There was nothing he could do about it. With a wave of his hand, he put away the shattered heaven/sword. Perhaps it was a kind of memento. After resting for a while, he recovered a lot of his strength. Let's go. It's time to reap the rewards, Chu-mu said and strode out. Chapter 1548. Although they did not know what they would gain, it was impossible that they did not gain anything other than the puppets after going through the 6 underground palaces. However, after Chu-mu and the other 3 searched the 6th underground palace, they did not gain anything. The 4 of them looked at each other. Could it be that the reward from the underground palace is the puppets? Lien Hongyun said unwillingly. Speaking of the puppets, they were not bad. The problem was that they could not control them. Just as they were feeling disappointed, there was a vibration and the wall of the 6th underground palace cracked open. A new door appeared. There is more. Gulwankong was stunned. The group walked into the open door immediately. The tattered book didn't say anything. Everyone was on high alert. This was a new underground palace. It could be said that it was the 7th underground palace. In the underground palace, there were a total of 7 puppets arranged in a row. The 7 puppets had different appearances and colors. Each of them was at least 2 meters tall. 2 of them were slender, and the swords they wielded were thinner. However, one of them was black in color, as if it had been birthed from the darkness. The other was pure white, elegant, and holy. The last one was tall and strong, and it wielded a dark brown sword. It seemed to be even more intricate and powerful than the puppets in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd chambers. The other 2 puppets had normal appearances and their proportions were normal. The swords they held were long swords. One of them was red and the other was silver. The last one was between normal and slimmer. It held a soft sword that was green in color. The last one was also the one in the middle. It had normal proportions and was between strong and agile. There were 2 swords on its back. They were silver in color and there were golden lines on the edges of the swords. Could it be a level 7 puppet array? Everyone's expression changed. They almost couldn't pass the level 6 puppet array. Needless to say, they wouldn't be able to pass the level 7 puppet array unless each of them had a major breakthrough in their cultivation and reached the level of a 2-star saint. Only then would they have a chance of resisting it. If they wanted to pass the level 6 puppet array, each of them would have to reach the level of a 3-star saint. Moreover, although the 7 different puppets did not give out powerful auras, they gave off different vibes. Chu-mu released his divine soul power and carefully approached the 7 puppet. He was surprised. This was because he discovered that he could not see through the 7 puppet. It was as if there was a layer of mysterious energy covering the puppets that blocked his spiritual energy. I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on at all. Following this, a wave of ripples appeared, startling Chu-mu and the others. They quickly circulated their energy within their bodies, and as they moved, the 4 divisions' sword formation was set up. The azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise formed. Everyone, there's no need to be nervous. I have no ill intentions. Along with the ripples, a shadow appeared. It was a black-robed, middle-aged man with a face full of vicissitude. Who are you? Chu-mu asked. The middle-aged man paused for a moment. I am the last successor of the puppet sect. However, all that's left of me is a remnant of my nascent divinity. I'm here to pass down the legacy of the puppet sect. Chu-mu and the others didn't say anything. They just stared fixedly at the middle-aged man's shadow. Their hearts were filled with shock. The ancient sacred city had existed for God knows how long, but this person could still leave a remnant of his nascent divinity. It was enough to show that his means were extraordinary. It should be known that the nascent divinity was said to be indestructible. However, once it reached the level of remnant of the nascent divinity, it meant that the nascent divinity had already dissipated. Only a bit of aura was left. It was very difficult to leave a remnant of the nascent divinity for a long period of time using a special method. The reason I left this underground palace behind is to choose a successor. The middle-aged man said, "You guys have passed through the underground palace and are qualified to pass down the legacy of the puppet sect. However, there are 4 of you, and only one of you can accept the legacy." Chu Mu and the others didn't move. They weren't sure if this was a trap. "Don't worry. I don't have any ill intentions, and I don't have any intention of taking over your body. I just don't want the puppet sect's legacy to end here," the middle-aged man said calmly. "If I had any ill intentions, these 7 heavenly puppets would be enough to capture all of you." As the middle-aged man finished speaking, the 7 heavenly puppets released powerful auras. All of them had reached the level of a 7-star saint. "You guys discuss who will accept the legacy," the middle-aged man said. Chu Mu and the others looked at each other. Puppet sect. Just by hearing the name, I know that you guys walk the path of puppetry. Sword Dao has already made me put in all my effort, Lien Hongyan said. I only like fighting. The path of puppetry doesn't suit me, Yang Zhantian said. If I get distracted again, I'm afraid I'll be left behind by you, Gu Luankong said. So, you guys are determined to distract me from the path of puppetry and delay my progress, Chu Mu said with a smile. It's good that you know. Lien Hongyun patted Chu Mu's shoulder and laughed. If I don't distract you, how can we work together happily in the future? The legacy of the ancient puppet sect would definitely be extraordinary. Gu Luankong and the other 2 might really be what they thought, but they also had the intention of being humble. Chu Mu smiled and didn't reject them. He strode out. Indeed, there were 7 7-star Saint Puppet. If he wanted to possess them, he could just capture them directly. There was no need to go through so much trouble. Besides, the middle-aged man's words were sincere. If he made a wrong judgment, it was his own fault. This was like a gamble. Opportunity. If one wanted to obtain an opportunity, how could there be a good opportunity without taking a risk? There was always a prerequisite for something like a pie falling from the sky. Walking to the front of the middle-aged man's shadow, the middle-aged man nodded and pointed at Chu Mu. A ray of black light shot out and shot into Chu Mu's forehead. It continuously entered Chu Mu's mind. As the black light entered, the middle-aged man's shadow became fainter and fainter. Chu Mu only felt that in his mind, lines of ancient divine scriptures appeared and circled around his mind like chains. Gu Luankong and the other 2 stood around Chu Mu, acting as his protectors. Time passed quickly. After an hour, the middle-aged man's shadow had completely disappeared. Chu Mu only felt that his head was stuffed, as if a huge rock was stuffed into it. It was extremely swollen and uncomfortable. He couldn't think and could only digest it bit by bit. This was the inheritance of the ancient puppet sect. The contents were all ancient divine scriptures. Chu Mu couldn't understand it, but he could understand the meaning within. As he digested it, Chu Mu gradually understood that a small part of the inheritance was the origin of the puppet sect. The majority of it was a secret manual called the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual, which was the true inheritance of the puppet sect. It included everything about the puppet sect. This process took Chu Mu almost 4 hours to finish reading. The Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual recorded the origin of puppets, the structure of puppets, the classification of puppets, how to create puppets, how to control puppets, how to use puppets to set up formations, etc. Everything was very detailed. Chu Mu only finished reading and didn't comprehend it in detail, as it would take a lot of time. At the end, it was an introduction to the heavenly puppet and how to create it. The heavenly puppet was the proudest puppet of the ancient puppet sect. It was fundamentally different from ordinary puppets. The complete heavenly puppet had its own intelligence. In other words, the complete heavenly puppet had the same intelligence as a human except for the structure of its body. Moreover, the heavenly puppet also had the ability to cultivate and increase its strength. After Chu Mu finished reading, he was shocked. The heavenly puppet was like a creation of life, except for the structure of its body. The ancient puppet sect made him feel even more shocked. Shortly after, Chu Mu opened his eyes and looked at the 7 motionless puppets. The 7 puppets were the heavenly puppets that the ancient puppet sect had spent a lot of effort to create. However, they were incomplete heavenly puppets. They had the shape but didn't have intelligence. However, the incomplete heavenly puppets could still be used and possessed great strength, the strength of a 7-star saint. How is it? Is the puppet sect very powerful? Lien Hongyun immediately asked when she saw Chu Mu open his eyes. Very powerful. Chu Mu nodded. Just the heavenly puppets were enough to make one unable to underestimate the puppet sect. In the ancient era, the puppet sect was definitely not an ordinary sect. Shortly after, Chu Mu waved his hand and the 3 incomplete heavenly puppets flew up and landed beside Gu Luankong and the other 2. Beside Gu Luankong was a silver heavenly puppet. Beside Yang Zhantian was a dark brown heavenly puppet. Beside Lien Hongyun was a red heavenly puppet. These are the heavenly puppets. As he spoke, Chu Mu roughly explained the heavenly puppets to the 3 of them. So powerful. Lien Hongyun's eyes lit up. These 3 are incomplete heavenly puppets. They don't have their own intelligence. However, they can be refined. As he spoke, Chu Mu taught them the method to refine the heavenly puppet. Gu Luankong and the other 2 immediately started to refine the heavenly puppet. Refining was to drip blood on the heavenly puppets and imprint their spiritual power to establish a connection. After refining the heavenly puppets, they would have a close connection with the 3 heavenly puppets. My heavenly puppets shall be named Red Fiend, Lien Hongyun said. Shortly after, she shouted in a flashy manner, Red Fiend, arm yourself. The red heavenly puppet beside her moved and disintegrated. It turned into pieces that flew up and revolved around Lien Hongyun's body. Shortly after, pieces fell down and covered Lien Hongyun's body. In the blink of an eye, Lien Hongyun turned into a red fiend heavenly puppet. With a boom, an extremely powerful aura burst out from Lien Hongyun's body. It was like a volcano erupting. It was extremely powerful. It was the aura of a 7-star martial saint. Shortly after, everyone felt a red shadow flashing in front of them. The red fiend heavenly puppet disappeared. Shortly after, there was only a very faint red shadow moving rapidly in the underground palace. Even with Chu Mu's eyesight, he could only catch a blurry shadow, let alone Gu Luankong and Yang Zhantian. Even a 7-star martial saint couldn't compare to such speed. If it attacked, they would definitely be hit before they could even react. Chapter 1549. Above the ancient sacred city, 4 figures flew forward. Silver with a tinge of gold, pure silver, dark brown and red. They were like flashes of light. In the blink of an eye, they came from afar and disappeared into the distance. Haha, awesome, this feels so good. Laughter came from the dark brown figure. It was Yang Zhantian's laughter. Super fast speed and powerful strength. It feels great, but the energy consumption is too fast. Lien Hongyun's voice came from the red figure. The pure silver figure was Gu Luankong. The silver figure with a tinge of gold was Chu Mu. There were a total of 7 heavenly puppets. Together with the middle-aged man's memories and the heavenly puppet secret manual, they were all part of the puppet sect's inheritance. After all, it wasn't easy to make a heavenly puppet. It could even be said that it was extremely difficult. The materials needed were special and precious. In the ancient times, the puppet sect had made less than 100 incomplete heavenly puppets and less than 10 completed heavenly puppets. After the battle, all the completed heavenly puppets had died. Only 7 of the incomplete heavenly puppets were left. Chu Mu gave 3 of them to Gu Luankong and the other 2 without hesitation. Each of the 7 heavenly puppets had the strength of a 7-star saint. Simply put, the maximum strength of each heavenly puppet was at the peak of the 7-star saint level. However, it could be adjusted according to one's wishes. It could be adjusted to unleash the strength of a 1-star saint, a 2-star saint, or even a 7-star saint. The greater the strength, the more energy it would consume. Inside Puppet Underground Palace, Chu Mu and the others had done a detailed experiment. Using their first layer of immemorial realm cultivation to support the heavenly puppet's 7-star saint rank strength, Chu Mu was the one who lasted the longest. He only lasted for 10 breaths of time. After 10 breaths of time, his energy was almost exhausted. Gu Luankong and the other 2 could only last 6 to 7 breaths. It couldn't be helped. Their cultivation was so weak compared to a 7-star saint level. It was only because of the special structure of the heavenly puppets that they could use their energy to move. Otherwise, the difference between a low-level saint level and a high-level saint level would be unbridgeable. If the heavenly puppet only displayed the strength of a 6-star sage, it would be able to last for several times longer. However, for a battle between powerhouses, a few breaths of time was simply not enough. Fortunately, there was a way to solve this problem in the Tian Ho Secret Manual, which was to use other energy crystals to replace the consumption of energy. However, although there were advantages to using energy crystals to replace energy consumption, there were also disadvantages. It was not easy to control. After all, it was not one's own power, so it was not easy to control it. It required an extremely short time to mobilize it, and for a powerhouse, this short time was enough to become a flaw. Fortunately, all kinds of problems were recorded in the Tian Ho Secret Manual, and there were also related solutions, but it required practice. This method was called the channeling method. It was to use one's own strength to guide the power of the energy crystal, thus allowing one to control it freely. Using a portion of one's strength to guide a portion of one's strength or even more energy from the energy crystals would consume one's strength, but the consumption would be many times lower than before. Chu Mu had a few thousand pure yang crystals in his collection. Originally, he felt that he would not be able to use them, so he planned to bring them back to the real sword sect. Now that he needed energy crystals, he took out some to test it out and found that it was feasible. The pure yang crystal was a kind of high-grade energy crystal. Every piece of pure yang crystal contained incomparably pure yang energy. Even if a high-level saint were to absorb it, it would be able to last for a period of time. If a low-level saint were to absorb it, a single piece would be able to last for a long time. Inside each heavenly puppet, there were acupuncture points for energy crystals to be embedded. There were a total of 18 of them, which meant that each heavenly puppet had 18 pure yang crystals. Furthermore, Chu Mu gave Gu Luankong and the other 2 100 pure yang crystals as backup. This way, even if the energy of the 18 pure yang crystals was depleted, they could still be replenished. However, it was not easy to deplete the energy of the 18 pure yang crystals. It was almost equivalent to the energy of a dozen high-level sages. In the Puppet Underground Palace, everyone cultivated the energy channeling technique for a period of time. When they had cultivated it to a very high level and could control it freely, they left the Puppet Underground Palace and went deeper into the ancient sacred city. As they flew, they did not use the speed of a 7-star saint. Instead, they maintained the speed of a 5-star saint. They used the energy channeling technique to circulate the energy throughout their bodies. The consumption of energy was very small, and the consumption of energy from the pure yang crystals was also very small. Originally, they were still hesitating about whether they should go deeper into the ancient sacred city, especially Gu Luankong and the other two. After all, their strongest power was only able to go against a 3-star saint. Even if they used all their strength and formed the 4-emblem sword formation, they would only be able to go against a 7-star saint. Under such circumstances, the pressure would be too great, and their energy would be depleted too quickly. They would not be able to last for long. Now, every heavenly puppet's power was at the peak of a 7-star saint. The problem of energy depletion was also solved. Every one of them had great power, and there was no reason for them not to go deeper into the ancient sacred city. They had tried it before, and they could still form the 4-emblem sword formation while controlling the heavenly puppet. Since it was like this, what was there to hesitate about? On the top floor of a tower that was still intact, there were 2 groups of people confronting each other. In this group, the weakest one was a 4-star saint, and the strongest one was a 6-star saint. In the middle of them, there was a ball of light. This ball of light was constantly changing colors. It was red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. It emitted a strange energy fluctuation. Everyone was very familiar with it. It was the energy fluctuation of the primordial spirit. In other words, inside this ball of light that was changing colors, there must be a treasure related to the primordial spirit. Treasures related to the primordial spirit, even if they were very ordinary, were very precious because there were too few of them. Such a valuable thing, everyone wanted to get it. 6 absolutes of Cold Mountain, we found this treasure first. If you know what's good for you, get out of here right now. Otherwise, we'll kill you all. The leader on the left sneered, and his killing intent was shocking. A bunch of mobs. You're the ones who need to get out. Otherwise, all of you will die. The eldest brother of the 6 absolutes of Cold Mountain said angrily. That's right. The 6 of them were the 6 absolutes of Cold Mountain who kicked Chu Mu to the curb after crossing the river. Then let's try. The group on the left had a total of 8 people. They had the upper hand in terms of numbers, but they were a temporary team, while the 6 absolutes of Cold Mountain had been together all year round and had a tacit understanding of each other. The atmosphere was bleak and tense. Both sides stared at each other, and were distracted by the changing ball of light in the middle, but no one dared to make the first move. What they said just now was just a threat to each other. It's not a good idea to go on like this. Why don't we each send 3 people to compete? 2 out of 3. The loser will leave automatically. The leader of the 8 people on the left said. Okay, how do you want to compete? The eldest brother of the 6 absolutes of Cold Mountain said. If they really went all out, it was hard to say who would win or lose. In the end, even if they won, they would suffer heavy losses. There's no need to compete. This thing belongs to us. A voice sounded. 4 figures flashed and appeared in the tower. One of them quickly approached the ball of light in the middle and reached out to grab it. Stop! You're courting death. The unexpected newcomer caused both sides to be startled and furious. They immediately attacked and attacked mercilessly. You are the ones who are looking for death. Lien Hongyan laughed. He controlled his power to the peak of the 6-star saint level and instantly unleashed his power. The red sword slashed across the sky, and red clouds appeared. Evil chi was rolling. The power of the sword was so strong that it forced the 2 people to retreat. Gu Luankong's sword seemed to have torn the space apart. It released a terrifying power that forced the 3 people to retreat. Yang Zhantian swung his sword and slashed fiercely. One of them was sent flying and crashed into the wall of the tower. With a boom, the whole tower shook. The 3 of them only controlled their power to the peak of the 6-star saint level. They blocked more than half of the people, and the rest of them attacked Chu Mu. The sky puppet that was named Tian Huang by Chu Mu jumped up with a sword on its back. It slashed out a silver light. Tian Huang opened his right hand and clenched it. Then, he slashed out with his sword. The power of the 6-star saint level was controlled by Chu Mu. A silver light flashed in front of him, and it was extremely sharp. With a slash, he forced the person who was attacking him to retreat. He turned around and slashed out again, forcing the person on the other side to retreat. His left hand was already grabbing the colorful light ball. When the light ball entered his hand, it immediately turned into a surge of energy and entered Chu Mu's palm. It then rushed into his brain. The people who were forced back by Chu Mu attacked again. Chu Mu ignored the information that was rushing into his brain. Compared to the inheritance of the puppet sect, this information was insignificant. He opened his left hand, and the other sword on his back flew into his left hand. The two swords clashed, and a terrifying sound wave burst out, attacking everyone's eardrums. With two slashes, the cross-sword light swept across the sky. It was unstoppable. It directly slashed through the bodies of a 4-star saint and a 5-star saint. His body swayed, and he dodged the attack from behind. He turned around and counterattacked. The sharp sword light was like thunder, and it was like a dragon. Kill. Under the two swords, no one could defeat him. He killed them one by one. Gu Luankong and the other two were also very powerful. They were invincible under the two swords. Not long after, the 14 4-star to 6-star saint experts were all killed. Only 3 6-star saint experts were still stubbornly resisting. Among these 3 6-star saint experts, the one with the highest cultivation base was the eldest brother of the Cold Mountain 6 Absolutes. The other two were the last 2 out of the 8. You have already gotten what you want. Let us go. The eldest brother of the Cold Mountain 6 Absolutes struggled to block Chu Mu's sword as he shouted. In the profound Yang Palace, from the moment you burned the bridge after crossing the river, you were destined to end up like this. Chu Mu said indifferently. However, the words he said made the other party's heart tremble. He suddenly recalled the scene at that time. A sword light enlarged in front of his eyes, and a chilling aura enveloped his whole body. Chapter 1550. We have no enmity with you. Let us go and we will tell you a secret in return. The remaining 2 6-star martial saints struggled to fend off the attacks of Gu Luankong and the other two as they shouted. Gu Luankong and the other two were using them as practice. After all, they were only 1-star martial saints. They could only unleash the power of a 3-star martial saint. The power of a peak 6-star martial saint was too strong for them. They needed time to get used to it before they could unleash it. Chu Mu took a look and realized that the 3 of them had the upper hand. If it wasn't for the fact that they had to get used to the power of a peak 6-star martial saint, they would have killed the 2 6-star martial saints. Chu Mu was relieved. He used his spiritual energy to collect the spatial rings of the dead martial saint. Then, he split his mind into 2. Half of it was focused on the outside world, while the other half was in his mind. The 7-colored radiance fluctuated and flashed in Chu Mu's mind. Ancient characters flowed one by one like a 7-colored radiant. Chu Mu read the ancient characters carefully. As he came into contact with more and more, his understanding of the ancient characters deepened. Naturally, it was easier for him to understand. This was a secret technique. A primordial spirit secret technique that could make countless people go crazy. The cultivation of the primordial spirit was very difficult. Therefore, secret techniques or treasures related to the primordial spirit were very valuable. There were 4 types of primordial spirit secret technique. The first type, primordial spirit cultivation secret technique. As the name suggested, it was a secret technique that was used to cultivate the power of the primordial spirit. After cultivation, one could condense the primordial spirit faster and increase the level of the primordial spirit. This was the foundation. It was like the cultivation techniques of origin energy or physique. However, it was far more valuable than chi cultivation or physique cultivation techniques. The second type, primordial spirit attack secret technique. It was easy to understand from the name. It was a secret technique that used the power of the primordial spirit to launch an attack. The primordial spirit attack secret technique naturally attacked the primordial spirit. The third type was the defensive Yuan spirit secret art. If there was an attack, there would naturally be a defense. Otherwise, how could one resist the attack? If one's Yuan spirit alone lacked sufficient defense, it would appear weak and powerless in the face of a Yuan spirit secret art. Without any defense, it would be easy to be injured. Once the Yuan spirit was injured, it would be very difficult to recover. Therefore, the defensive Yuan spirit secret art was often more precious than the offensive Yuan spirit secret art. The fourth type was the soulating secret method. The first type was to strengthen oneself, which was to temporarily increase the level of the soulating secret method. The second type was to weaken the opponent, which was to temporarily weaken the opponent's soulating secret method. The third type was the soulating secret method. It was very difficult to heal one's soulating secret method. Of course, there were some spiritual medicines that could heal one's soulating secret method, but there were very few of them. The soulating secret method was used to heal the injured soulating secret method. The fourth type was the soulating secret method, which was called the soulating secret method. Whether it was the soulating secret method or the soulating secret method, the final power of the soulating secret method was related to the level of the soulating secret method. For example, if A and B both learned the same soulating secret method, if their soulating secret methods were of the same level, they would cancel each other out. However, if A's soulating secret method was of a higher level than B's, then A's soulating secret method would be able to suppress B's soulating secret method. It could even destroy B's soulating secret method. Moreover, the higher the level of the soulating secret method, the more powerful the soulating secret method or the soulating secret method would be. In terms of value, the soulating secret method was the most precious. Among them, the soulating secret method and the soulating secret method were even more valuable. The soulating secret method that Chu Mu had obtained belonged to the third type, the soulating secret method. It was called the soulating secret method. It was a soulating secret method. Regardless of whether it was the soulating secret method, the soulating secret method, or the soulating secret method, they were all divided into 12 levels. From level 1 to 12, level 1 was the lowest and level 12 was the highest. A level 1 soulating secret method could only cultivate the soulating secret method to the peak of level 1. A level 2 soulating secret method could cultivate the soulating secret method to the peak of level 2, and so on. A level 12 soulating secret method could naturally cultivate the soulating secret method to the peak of level 12. Correspondingly, primordial spirit attack and defense secret techniques required a corresponding primordial spirit rank to train. Rainbow Ring was a 7th rank primordial spirit defense secret technique, but Chu Mu's primordial spirit was only at the peak of the 2nd rank. This meant that he could only train Rainbow Ring to the 2nd rank. It could defend against 2nd rank primordial spirit attack secret techniques, and to a large extent, defend against 3rd rank primordial spirit attack secret technique. The soulating secret method, on the other hand, was not divided into levels 1 to 12. It could even be said that there was no detailed classification of levels. While Gu Luankong and the other two were getting used to the heavenly puppet's power, Chu Mu had a deeper understanding of the soulating secret method. A level 7 soulating secret method was suitable for level 1 to level 7 primordial spirit. The soulating secret method, as the name suggested, was made up of the 7 colors of red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. When one cultivated it to a certain level, there would be rings of different colors outside the soulating secret method. Chu Mu decided to try cultivating it. The first ring was the red ring. With Chu Mu's superb intelligence, he quickly grasped the cultivation method of the red ring. With a peak level 2 primordial spirit, he didn't encounter any difficulties in cultivating the red ring. However, he didn't dare to fully focus on cultivating the red ring. Hence, his progress was slower. After Gu Luankong and the other two had gotten used to their new power and killed the 2 6-star martial saints, a red ring of light formed around Chu Mu's soulating secret method. The soulating secret method was completed. Next, it was time to split the spoils. After splitting the spoils, Chu Mu recorded the cultivation method of the soulating secret method and gave each of them a copy. Gu Luankong and the other two were overjoyed when they received it. The level 7 soulating secret method was equivalent to a level 7 primordial spirit. A level 7 primordial spirit was a silver primordial spirit. Most martial saints only had a bronze primordial spirit. The primordial spirits of Gu Luankong and the other two were only level 1 primordial spirit. It would take them a long time to cultivate the soulating secret method. Hence, they decided to stay in the tower for the time being. Chu Mu didn't object as he planned to cultivate the orange ring. The orange ring was a level 2 defense method and was naturally stronger than the red ring. However, Chu Mu's primordial spirit was at the peak of level 2. Hence, it wouldn't be easy for him to cultivate the orange ring. The four of them stayed in the tower. After setting up a seal, they started cultivating. It was better to be safe than sorry. Although the soulating secret method was rare and precious, it was hard to guarantee that some martial saints would be able to defend themselves against attacks from the primordial spirit. As time passed, Chu Mu and the other three continued to cultivate. The cultivation of the primordial spirit secret method was based on the primordial spirit. Chu Mu's primordial spirit let go of the sword soul. As he waved his hands, he formed handprints according to the cultivation method of the orange ring. Every handprint formed would turn into a mysterious orange rune. It would fly out and appear between the soulating secret method and the primordial spirit. Gradually, the runes connected. Every time a primordial spirit rune was formed, a portion of Chu Mu's primordial spirit would be consumed. However, the primordial spirit's primordial spirit could be recovered. When cultivating the soulating secret method, the primordial spirit runes used up very little primordial spirit because the primordial spirit was at the peak of level 2 while the soulating secret method was at level 1. However, it was different for the soulating secret method because the orange ring was at level 2. Chu Mu reduced the speed at which the primordial spirit runes were formed. However, the recovery speed of the primordial spirit still couldn't keep up. After a few hours, the last orange primordial spirit rune was formed. It flew out and entered the gap. Suddenly, all the orange primordial spirit runes lit up and connected to form an orange ring that surrounded Chu Mu's primordial spirit. The outermost ring was a red ring. Further in was an orange ring. If the soulating secret method was completed, the 7 rings would be red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. After cultivating the orange ring, Chu Mu tried to cultivate the yellow ring. The yellow ring corresponded to a level 3 primordial spirit. Chu Mu's primordial spirit was at the peak of level 2. However, because his soul power was stronger than others of the same level, his primordial spirit was also strengthened to a certain extent. After trying, Chu Mu successfully formed a yellow ring primordial spirit rune. However, it consumed a lot of primordial spirit's primordial spirit. The yellow ring can be cultivated, but it consumes a lot of primordial spirit's primordial spirit and takes a lot of time. Chu Mu frowned slightly and said to himself, "It was fine for a short period of time, but it wasn't suitable for a long period of time." At this moment, Gu Luankong and the other two opened their eyes. They had cultivated the red ring. After spending some time to recover their primordial spirit's primordial spirit, the 4 of them moved again and left the tower. The heavenly puppet not only had great strength, but it also had a strong defense due to the special materials that it was made of. Even if it was hit by a 7-star martial sage, it wouldn't be damaged. However, if it was an 8-star martial sage's attack, it would be a great threat. However, this already gave Chu Mu and the other 3 the ability to compete with high-level martial sages. The 4 of them moved quickly. After leaving the tower, they continued to go deeper into the ancient sacred city. The deeper they went into the ancient sacred city, the greater the chance of finding a fortuitous opportunity. Everyone only chose one path. Unless they saw or felt something, they wouldn't deviate from their original path. It was the same for Chu Mu and the other three. The ancient sacred city was huge, and it was impossible for them to go around in a circle to search. This was because the deeper they went into the ancient sacred city, the better the fortuitous opportunity they would find. If you tried your best to search for the surrounding fortuitous opportunities, others would go deeper into the ancient sacred city and find better fortuitous opportunities. Moreover, Chu Mu and the other three were in the top 10 of the Heaven Youth Roll. They were all protected by the providence of the Heaven Youth Roll, and their chances of finding fortuitous opportunities were much higher than ordinary people. However, having more providence than others didn't mean that they wouldn't run into trouble. Not long after, trouble came knocking on their door. Chu Mu's group of 4 had their path blocked by a few high-stage, saint-rank experts. Chapter 1551. Xing thought that he had lived for a long time and was very knowledgeable. Even in the ancient sacred city, there was nothing that he didn't recognize. After leading his subordinates into the ancient sacred city as the first batch, almost all the treasures they encountered along the way fell into their hands. Some were taken by people of similar strength, and some were not discovered by them. No matter what, their strength was very strong. There was almost no one who dared to provoke them. Hence, they had gained a lot along the way. Now, Xing actually saw 4 figures. 4 strange figures that he didn't recognize. Chu Mu and the other 3, who were advancing at the speed of a 5-star saint rank, were stopped by Xing Yi's 3 subordinates. His 3 subordinates were all genuine 7-star saint rank experts. "What are you guys?" Xing looked left and right, but couldn't identify them. Hence he asked, "Do you have any advice?" Chu Mu was the leader of the 4, so he asked. The 3 people surrounding them emitted very powerful auras. They were true 7-star saint rank experts. However, they hadn't reached the peak of 7-star saint rank yet. The person standing outside the 3 7-star saint rank experts gave Chu Mu a feeling that he was even stronger than the 3 7-star saint rank experts. "Leave your armor behind and I will spare your lives," Xing said indifferently. Xing said nonchalantly. The 4 celestial puppets exuded energy waves that were at the level of a 5-star saint. In his eyes, 5-star saint and 6-star saint were like ants. Even his 7-star saint subordinates were no match for them, let alone him. "Retreat now and we will let bygones be bygones," Chu Mu said indifferently. 3 7-star saints and 1 8-star saint expert. Such opponents were unprecedented. They were very strong. Chu Mu wasn't willing to fight with them. "Take them down." Xing didn't say anything else and directly gave the order. The reason why he asked Chu Mu and the others to surrender was because he was afraid that the 4 strange armors would be damaged if they attacked. After all, these things gave him a mysterious feeling. He had never seen them before and they were worth studying. But since the other party didn't listen to him, it was no longer up to them. Xing had never been an easygoing person, unless the other party had the strength to face him head-on. As soon as he finished speaking, the 3 7-star martial saints all made their move. They didn't draw their swords. Instead, they simply raised their hands and grabbed out. Their palms rapidly expanded, and it felt as if they could grab Chu Mu and the others with just one hand. Boom, 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 boom. The bodies of the 4 heavenly puppets trembled. In an instant, it was as if a volcano that had been dormant for 10,000 years had suddenly erupted. An incomparably tyrannical power exploded from within their bodies. Dust and dirt flew into the air as they soared into the sky. The earth and the void seemed to tremble in an instant. The expressions of the 3 7-star martial saints changed drastically. Xing Yi's expression also changed drastically. The power of a pinnacle 7-star saint shook the void and was fully released. This feeling of releasing all of their power made Chu Mu and the other 3 feel carefree. It was an incomparable carefree feeling. They had already fully grasped the power of a pinnacle 7-star saint. However, they still hadn't grasped the power of a pinnacle 7-star saint. This was because none of the opponents that they had faced before required them to display the power of a pinnacle 7-star saint. Unleashing such a powerful power would consume a lot of energy, and they wouldn't use it easily. Now that they were facing 3 7-star martial saints, they didn't dare to hold back anymore. Kill! Yang Zhantian roared as he raised his sword. Terrifying power condensed on the sword, and the sword shone brightly. He raised his sword and slashed out fiercely. The huge sword light was dazzling, and its aura was shocking. It was as if the sword could split the heavens and the earth apart. The expression of the 7-star saint-level powerhouse changed drastically. The power of this sword strike made him feel threatened. Lian Hongyun also drew her sword. Her red sword slashed out instantly, and hundreds of sword light were densely packed. It was like a storm, and it covered one of the 7-star martial saints. Gu Luankong slashed out with his sword, and the sword light jumped around in the void like water. It was unpredictable, and the third 7-star martial saint's expression changed. He quickly tried to dodge. Chu Mu leaped up, and his 2 swords flew up. He opened his hands and grabbed the 2 swords. Like a swallow, he dashed towards Xing Yi. Chu Mu was the leader of the 4. This was the status that came with strength. Without the heavenly puppets, Chu Mu could kill Gu Luankong and the other 2 by himself. However, with the help of the heavenly puppets, the gap between the 4 of them was shortened. After all, the reason why Chu Mu was so much stronger than Gu Luankong and the others was because he was exceptional. However, the 4 heavenly puppets were much stronger than them. When they were using the heavenly puppets, their own strength was insignificant, and they had no advantage. Even so, there were still differences between the 4 heavenly puppets. Gu Luankong and the other 2 heavenly puppets had the same strength, but Chu Mu's heavenly puppet was the best out of the 7. Although it was also at the peak of the 7-star martial saint level, it was made of better materials. It was stronger, faster, and had a stronger defense. Moreover, Chu Mu's battle skills were above Gu Luankong and the other 2 heavenly puppets. With his 2 swords, Gu Luankong and the other 2 heavenly puppets were no match for Chu Mu at all. Even if it was 1 against 3, Chu Mu could still fight against the 3 of them together. Naturally, Xing Yi became Chu Mu's opponent. This was Chu Mu's first time fighting against an 8-star martial saint. He was very excited. "You overestimate yourself." A cold smile appeared on Xing Yi's face as he looked at the Heaven Wasteland's heavenly puppet that was flying towards him. He lifted his finger and shook it gently. Under the ripples in the void, a dark brown light condensed and shot out at an extremely fast speed. In an instant, the brown ray of light shot through the Heavenly Wasteland heavenly puppet, piercing through it. However, Xing Yi did not show any signs of joy. Instead, he frowned slightly because in that instant, his vision blurred. The silver figure with golden threads seemed to have spun and left behind an afterimage. Suddenly, a bright cross sword light fell from above his head. Xing Yi felt a chill and a sense of threat. Although the 2 swords of the heavenly puppet weren't spiritual swords, the materials used to make them were extremely precious. This caused the hardness and toughness of the 2 swords to be better than many heavenly saint swords. Even many spiritual swords couldn't compare to them. They were extremely sharp. If not for the fact that the 2 swords were a set with the heavenly puppet and were too long, Chu Mu would have wanted to cultivate them into his own spiritual sword. In a flash, Xing Yi disappeared under Chu Mu's sword. The cross sword light also disappeared, showing Chu Mu's shocking control of power. The moment Xing Yi disappeared, Chu Mu felt a strong force coming from the side. It was like a landslide that could easily destroy a mountain. He paused and turned around. The 2 swords slashed out hundreds of times in an instant. The densely packed sword light bombarded and collided with each other. The power of an 8-star martial saint was far stronger than that of a 7-star martial saint. Under the confrontation, the aftershock was like a storm that wreaked havoc in all directions. The heavenly puppet couldn't help but fly back. If it was a real person, he would definitely be injured under such a confrontation. However, the heavenly puppet's defense was shocking. It was only blown back and wasn't injured at all. Chumu, who was inside the heavenly puppet, could feel the strong force. However, he wasn't affected by the strong force. The heavenly puppet blocked it all. Only when the force exceeded the limits of the heavenly puppet would it affect the person inside the heavenly puppet. After landing, he stomped on the ground and his power exploded. He turned into a flash of light and attacked Xing-Yi with both swords. On the other side, Gu Luankong and the other two were fighting with 3 7-star martial saints. The 3 of them were already familiar with the power of a 6-star martial saint. However, they were using the power of a 7-star martial saint. It was much stronger than a 6-star martial saint. With their level, it wasn't easy for them to control it. 3 7-star martial saints were just right for them to practice with. Gu Luankong and the other 2 hadn't mastered the power of a 7-star martial saint. Therefore, when they were fighting with 3 7-star martial saints, they were restrained. Although their attacks were powerful, they were rigid and inflexible. On the other hand, although the 3 7-star martial saints weren't at the 7-star martial saint peak and weren't as strong as Gu Luankong and the other 2, they were still 7-star martial saints. They had reached this level step by step. They had rich battle experience and had a good grasp of their own power. It was difficult for Gu Luankong and the other 2 to kill 3 7-star martial saints. On the other hand, it was also difficult for 3 7-star martial saints to take down Gu Luankong and the other 2. Both sides were fighting fiercely and were evenly matched. On the other side, it was the battle between Chumu and Xing-Yi. Xing-Yi, who was an 8-star martial saint, had unparalleled battle experience. He had strong power and could control his own power well. Chumu's battle experience might not be as good as Xing-Yi's, but his battle talent was above Xing-Yi's. He also had an extraordinary learning ability. He could control the power of the heaven puppet, which was at the 7-star martial saint peak. In terms of power, the heaven puppet wasn't as good as Xing-Yi. In terms of speed, the heaven puppet wasn't as good as Xing-Yi. In this situation, Chumu was at a disadvantage. However, he used his unparalleled battle talent to fight Xing-Yi to a draw. Although he was at a disadvantage, Xing-Yi couldn't kill him. Xing-Yi was shocked. With his strength, he couldn't take down this strange 7-star martial saint peak armor. Earth technique, earth cage. Since he couldn't take down Chumu, Xing-Yi used a technique. Amidst the rumbling, Chumu felt a suction force emanate from the ground under his feet. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed onto the heaven wasteland heavenly puppet. Immediately after, dark brown pillars drilled out from the ground. They were extremely fast, forming a cage to imprison him. Chumu didn't dare to underestimate the technique used by an 8-star martial saint expert. He slashed out with his sword and used the extreme slash-sword style to cut through everything. With a sharp sword, the tyrannical extreme beheading sword style's power was displayed to the extreme. As the sword slashed down, the extreme sword light sliced apart the dark brown pillars of the earth prison. Chumu rode on the heaven wasteland heavenly puppet and seized the opportunity to instantly charge out. Chapter 1552. The power of a high-level martial saint was terrifyingly destructive. Wherever the 8 of them fought, the ground around them would be affected. The dilapidated palace had completely collapsed, and the half-collapsed walls were completely shattered. Gu Luankong and the other 2 gradually adapted to the power of a peak 7-star martial saint and started to gain the upper hand. However, it was difficult for them to kill their opponent. After all, their battle experience was not as rich as their opponent. On the other side, the battle between Chumu and Xing-Yi was extremely intense. Chumu was powerful, but he was still at a disadvantage. After all, there was a huge difference between a peak 7-star martial saint and a beginner 8-star martial saint. The fact that he could hold on showed that he was not ordinary. The more Xing Yi fought, the more frustrated he became. He clearly had the upper hand and suppressed his opponent, but he could not defeat his opponent. His opponent's tenacity was beyond his expectations. He was like a cockroach that could not be killed. Instead, he had a feeling that he had become a sparring partner. The more they fought, the stronger his opponent became. That's right. Chu Mu was using the pressure from Xing Yi to train his sword skills and movement skills. Turning pressure into motivation, using battle to nurture battle, the effect was very obvious. Set up the formation, Xing Yi shouted with an ugly expression. If they continued to fight, they might be able to exhaust their opponent's energy and then capture him. However, this was not the result that Xing Yi wanted. He did not want to become a sparring partner. Under Xing Yi's command, the 3 7-star martial saints immediately retreated and approached Xing Yi. The 4 of them immediately stood in a mysterious position. Seeing where they stood, Chu Mu and the others were stunned. Sword formation of the 4 divisions? That's right. The position that Xing Yi and the others were standing in was 60 to 70% similar to the sword formation of the 4 divisions that they had mastered. You are quite knowledgeable. Unfortunately, your end is here. Xing Yi sneered. He stood on the Azure Dragon position and was in charge of the attack and defense. Set up the formation. Let them see what the sword formation of the 4 divisions is. Chu Mu smiled and said. The sword formation of the 4 symbols that Xing Yi and the others had set up could not be considered the true sword formation of the 4 symbols because they were not sword cultivators or sword saint. Strictly speaking, it could only be considered the sword formation of the 4 symbols. Although Chu Mu hadn't studied formations before, he was quite good at breaking formations. Also, the 4 of them had cultivated the sword formation of the 4 symbols that Gu Luankong had given them. The sword formation of the 4 symbols was created by Deshang, and it contained the secrets of the sword formation of the 4 symbols. Even with their superb comprehension abilities, they spent a lot of time and under tremendous pressure before they finally cultivated the true secret 4 symbols sword formation to perfection. A perfect sword array of the 4 symbols was different from an ordinary sword array of the 4 symbols. It could condense the power of the 4 symbols, and in a situation where the power of the 4 symbols was condensed, the power of the sword array of the 4 symbols would be greatly increased. This was also the reason why Chu Mu was able to withstand the 8-star saint-level sword strike of the puppet array and only suffer heavy injuries without dying. With a flash, Chu Mu and the other 3 immediately set up the 4 symbols sword array. It's also the 4 symbols sword array. Interesting. Xing Yi's face revealed a cold smile. The other 3 7-star saints also laughed. It was a kind of disdain, as if they were mocking Chu Mu and the others for overestimating themselves. This was because the 4 symbols sword array was the battle formation that the 4 of them were best at. They had worked with each other for hundreds of years, and they had completely mastered the 4 symbols sword array. They had also derived many changes, and its power was shocking. Even an 8-star saint-level pinnacle expert could withstand it. Under the 4 symbols sword array, Xing Yi and the other 3 moved quickly. With the Azure Dragon, the White Tiger, the Vermilion Bird, and the Black Tortoise supporting them, they charged towards Chu Mu and the others. Suddenly, a dragon's roar was heard. Above Chu Mu's head, there was a green aura that spread out and condensed into a green dragon. It was the Azure Dragon, but also the Azure Dragon. Every scale on the Azure Dragon's body could be seen clearly, and they were very lifelike. Then, a tiger's roar was heard. Above Gu Luankong's head, there was a platinum aura gathering, and a white tiger appeared. The black patterns on the tiger's body were clear and lively. The roar of the Vermilion Bird and the roar of the Black Tortoise. The true secret 4 symbols sword array, the spirit of the 4 symbols and the power of the 4 symbols were displayed. What is this? Xing Yi and the other 3 were shocked. They had studied the 4 symbols sword array for hundreds of years, and they had completely mastered the mysteries of the four symbols sword array. They had also integrated their own understanding into it, and derived many changes. However, none of them were like what they saw in front of them. The azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise were the four symbols. The four symbols sword array was created based on the four symbols. Capture them. Xing Yi's eyes lit up, and he had an idea. If he captured Chu Mu and the other three, not only would he be able to get the 4 sets of special armor, he would also be able to force them to tell him the 4 symbols sword array that they had cultivated. It was a 4 symbols sword array that could form the 4 symbols. It was definitely a very high-level 4 symbols sword array. As they got closer, the battle began. In the true secret 4 symbols sword array, the azure dragon was the main, Chu Mu was the main attacker, and the other 3 were the support. As they waved their swords, the 4 of them moved quickly and got closer to Xing Yi and the others. The power of the 4 symbols above their heads also poured down. Fire and earth technique, meteor break. Xing Yi used the destructive fire and earth hybrid technique, meteor break. Instantly, their 4 symbols formation was wrapped up by a burst of fire and earth power. It turned into a meteor-like attack and blasted towards Chu Mu and the others. The terrifying power and aura impact were so strong that even a mountain would be completely smashed under the bombardment of the meteor break, and the earth would crack. Even a peak 8-star martial saint would not be willing to face such a power head-on. However, Chu Mu, who was under the true secret 4 symbols sword array, was not someone an 8-star martial saint could compare to. The 2 swords attacked from the front and back. The extreme beheading sword style could cut through everything. The incomparably sharp sword light of the extreme beheading sword style collided with the giant fireball that Xing Yi and the others had transformed into. The fact once again proved the power of the Heaven Wasteland's heavenly puppets' twin swords. They were not damaged at all. Under the support of the true secret 4 symbols sword array, the strength of a peak 7-star martial saint was further enhanced. The power of the extreme beheading sword style was even more terrifying. Chu Mu's sword slashed out, cutting through the giant fireball, and continued to slash towards the center. Sparks flew from the sword, and the high temperature continued to roast. Chu Mu could clearly feel it, but he was not affected. All of it was blocked by the Heaven Wasteland's heavenly puppet. The giant fireball was split apart by Chu Mu's sword. The sword light did not stop, and it continued to slash towards Xing Yi. The other sword slashed out, and the terrifying impact of the divine soul, slashing through the Tao. Under the huge difference in power, Xing Yi could only barely resist with all his strength. He blocked the first sword, but he could not block the second sword. The extreme beheading sword style, slashing through the Tao. Xing Yi was shocked. The divine soul impact of the extreme beheading sword style had caused his primordial spirit to tremble. His primordial spirit was a level 4 primordial spirit, and it was extremely powerful. For it to tremble in the face of the extreme beheading sword style meant that the power of the extreme beheading sword style was extremely terrifying, and it had the effect of targeting the primordial spirit. The extreme beheading sword style had integrated the essence of the god-slaying sword style, and the god-slaying sword style itself could affect the spiritual level to a certain extent. After the essence was extracted and integrated into the extreme beheading sword style, this ability was further strengthened. Of course, if Chu Mu had used his own strength to perform the extreme beheading sword style, it would not have been a threat to Xing Yi's primordial spirit, let alone shake it. The power of the extreme beheading sword style was closely related to one's level. The extreme beheading sword style performed by a 1-star martial saint was far from being comparable to the extreme beheading sword style performed by a 7-star martial saint. Xing Yi could only watch as an indescribably brilliant sword light slashed down from the sky. His primordial spirit trembled, and his body turned cold, his limbs stiff. "No!" Xing Yi roared. Unable to dodge, he could only watch as Chu Mu's sword slashed down. His heart was filled with unwillingness and despair. Chumu's heart was cold. His eyes were indifferent, and his sword slashed down without hesitation. So what if Xing Yi was an 8-star martial saint expert? Xing Yi's enemy should be prepared to die. On the other hand, if Xing Yi was not strong enough, he would be the one to be killed. Xing Yi would not have the slightest mercy. Kindness depended on who it was directed at. At the beginning, people might be kind by nature. However, if they wanted to become strong, they were bound to experience life and death. Kindness, pity, weakness, and so on had long been abandoned by many people. A slight swishing sound was heard. The sword light that slashed down was unstoppable. It directly broke Xing Yi's raised sword, and it fell from the top of his head. The sword was split into two. With one slash, Xing Yi, an 8-star martial saint, was killed. The remaining 3 7-star martial saints' expressions changed drastically. They were extremely shocked. The 3 of them looked at each other and immediately burst out at full speed, flying in 3 different directions. "It's too late to run now," Chumu sneered. He waved his 2 swords and slashed out 2 crescent sword light. It was extremely fast, and it slashed towards 2 of the 7-star martial saints. In the blink of an eye, the crescent sword light caught up with the 2 7-star martial saints. Chumu burst out with his speed and left the sword formation of the 4 symbols. He charged towards the 3rd 7-star martial saint expert. Gu Luankong and the other 2 also split up and chased after the other 2 7-star martial saints. In the blink of an eye, Chumu, who had burst out at full speed, caught up with the 3rd 7-star martial saint expert. He was like a divine soldier descending from the heavens, and his 2 swords slashed down. Chumu's 2 crescent sword light were dodged by the opponent. However, because of this, his speed was reduced, and Gu Luankong and the other 2 caught up with him. "Stop, or I will explode and die with you." Under Chumu's 2 swords, the 7-star martial saint quickly threatened Chumu. "Why don't you try?" Chumu replied coldly. He executed the Dao Crusher and shook the 7-star martial saint's Yuan Shin, preventing him from gathering his strength to explode. Insta-kill. After killing the 7-star martial saint with 1 sword, Chumu immediately charged towards the other 7-star martial saint expert. This 7-star martial saint expert was being held back by Gu Luankong and couldn't escape. Thousands of clouds filled the air, and his movements became sluggish. A beam of sword light silently pierced through the 7-star martial saint expert. Insta-kill. The last 7-star martial saint expert was being held back by Lian Hongyun and Yang Zhantian. Chumu turned in midair and flew back like a swallow. His speed increased as he charged towards the last 7-star martial saint expert. In a flash, the sword light shone brightly. It was cold and chilling. 1 sword beheaded the 7-star martial saint expert. 3 7-star saint rank experts and 1 8-star low-stage saint rank expert had all died under Chumu's sword. Chapter 1553. I knew that there would be a day when a 7-star saint would be suppressed by me, but I didn't expect that day to come so early. Lian Hongyun smiled. This feeling was incomprehensible to those who had not experienced it personally. A 7-star saint expert was a high-level saint expert, while Lian Hongyun and the others were only low-level saints. Moreover, they were the lowest level of the low-level saints, 1-star early saint. They were worthy of being called experts in front of cultivators below the eternal realm, but in front of high-level saints, they were no different from ants. There was not much difference between them and cultivators below the eternal realm. If there was a difference, it would be that he was a stronger ant. That was all. Now, Lian Hongyun and the others were able to hold their own against a 7-star saint expert even though they were only 1-star initial level saints. This was unimaginable in the past. One day, I will use my own strength to kill a high-level saint expert. Yang Zhantian said, his eyes shining brightly. That day won't be too far away. Chumu said. The 4 high-level saints were all dead, and their interspatial rings became the spoils of war for Chu Mu and the other three. Xing Yi's interspatial ring naturally went to Chu Mu. The other three interspatial rings went to Gu Luankong and the other two. Xing Yi was the leader of the four, so his interspatial ring was the richest and most valuable. They did not check the items in the interspatial ring carefully, and the four of them moved forward quickly. Now that they were strong enough to fight against high-level saints, they naturally wanted to reach the center of the city as soon as possible. As they moved forward, the closer they got to the center, the more people they encountered. However, Chu Mu and the other three did not meet anyone like Xing Yi. Or rather, there were people like Xing Yi, but they were more cautious. Those who dared to come to the center of the eternal sacred city, and had the ability to do so, would definitely have some tricks up their sleeve. A huge blood-red pillar that seemed to connect the heavens and earth blocked their path. When they looked up, they could not see the end of it. This blood-red wall was like a wall, blocking everyone's path, making it impossible for them to continue forward. The blood-red wall was somewhat translucent. Vaguely, one could see the scene behind the blood-red wall. There seemed to be many tall buildings and towers, but they also seemed to be illusions. Break! With a loud roar, a fiery red chi spread out in all directions. It stretched out, forming a huge fiery red crescent moonlight that was hundreds of meters long. The terrifying chi let everyone know that this attack could easily destroy mountains and tear the earth apart. The 100-meter-long fiery red crescent directly bombarded the blood-red shield, but in return there was a soft sound. The 100-meter-long fiery red crescent was like a wave crashing against a reef, shattering and splashing everywhere. However, the blood-red shield did not move at all, not even a ripple was created. Impossible! The person who launched the attack opened his eyes wide, his eyeballs almost popping out. One must know that he was a 7-star martial saint. That attack contained 80% of his strength. It was fine if he could not break it, but there was no reaction at all. In other words, even if he used all his strength, he could not do anything to the blood-red shield in front of him. "Watch me," another person said. Another person said. Immediately, numerous golden rays of light gathered from all directions and gathered into one. As they rotated, they transformed into a rapidly rotating awl. Its sharp end was aimed at the blood-red barrier as it crazily rotated. Rustling sounds were heard continuously, as if a steel drill was drilling into an extremely hard glass. The sound was very ear-piercing, and it made people feel uncomfortable. One by one, they frowned. However, no matter how hard the golden drill tried, the blood-red shield did not move at all, and there was no damage at all. After a dozen breaths, the golden drill dispersed, and a person fell out. His face was red from overexertion. He glanced at the undamaged blood-red shield with hatred, but there was nothing he could do. This person was an 8-star martial saint. Chu Mu and the other three stood to one side without moving, and they attracted the attention of many people. Their eyes were filled with curiosity and inquisitiveness. After all, with a single glance, one could tell that the four of them were not real bodies. They were over 2 meters tall, and their bodies had a metallic texture. They gave off an icy aura which was not life. Some people released their spiritual energy, directly covering Chu Mu and the others. They kept drilling into the shield, intending to find out what was going on. This was undoubtedly very impolite, and could be seen as a kind of provocation. Chu Mu was immediately enraged. He activated the power of the Heaven Wasteland Heavenly Puppet, directly blocking the probing spiritual energy, and cutting off part of the spiritual energy that had seeped into the shield. Muffled groans sounded, and the bodies of those who had released their spiritual energy swayed. Their faces instantly turned abnormally pale, and then turned dark red. Clearly, their spiritual energy had been damaged. Immediately after, an extremely powerful aura exploded from the Heaven Wasteland Heavenly Puppet, shooting up to the sky. That aura had a shocking sharpness, and it had a tinge of eternal indestructibility, occupying the void. It was the aura of a 7-star martial saint, and it was much stronger than an ordinary 7-star martial saint. Following that, Gu Luankong and the other two also activated the power of the Heaven Wasteland Heavenly Puppet. The power of a 7-star martial saint surged out, shooting up to the sky as if it had a physical form. Their feet moved quickly, and as their bodies intersected, they formed the sword formation of the 4 symbols. Vaguely, the crowd seemed to hear the roar of the green dragon, the roar of the white tiger, the shriek of the vermilion bird, and the roar of the black tortoise. The aura that shot up to the sky suddenly surged, breaking through the 7-star martial saint level, and reaching the 8-star martial saint level. It seemed like it was still increasing. The faces of the crowd changed instantly. Those who were slightly injured by Chu Mu's cutting of their spiritual energy had originally planned to take revenge. However, all of their spiritual energy had quietened down, and they did not dare to take action recklessly. This was because they could not see through their opponents, and their opponents were too strong. Since this was the case, they could only admit that they were unlucky. However, Chu Mu and the other 3 had become the target of many people. They would definitely be targeted in the future. Since there were people who were targeting Chu Mu and the other 3, there would naturally be people who wanted to befriend them. Some of them were curious, and wanted to find out what they were wearing. "Sir, the armor that you are wearing is very unique. It looks like a puppet. I wonder if you still have more? I am willing to pay a high price for it." A fat man approached and said with a smile. He was wearing a golden robe, and the robe was filled with the patterns of ingot. His chubby face was smiling, and his eyes were squinted into a line. He looked like an unscrupulous merchant. It was hard to imagine that such a person who looked like an unscrupulous merchant was actually an 8-star martial saint. "I don't have any more." In fact, he still had more. Of course, no matter how high the price was, he would not sell them. One should know that it was extremely difficult to forge a heavenly puppet. Chu Mu himself did not know if he could forge one in the future. Even if he could, it would be very difficult. Since that was the case, he would not sell the remaining heavenly puppets no matter what. He still planned to perfect them as much as possible and give birth to spiritual intelligence, so that they could become complete heavenly puppets. "My name is Jin Yuanbao. How may I address you?" The fat man rolled his eyes and immediately changed the topic, introducing himself. Hearing his name, Chu Mu was shocked. Jin Yuanbao. What a domineering name. Coupled with the glittering ingots on his robe, it was even more amazing. When he took a closer look, he realized that the robe on Jin Yuanbao's body was made of fine gold silk. The Yuanbao had seals on it, making the robe a treasure robe with amazing defensive capabilities. It had to be said that Jin Yuanbao was a very vulgar person. However, some cultivators had always been carefree and did not care about how others looked at them. Moreover, Jin Yuanbao was originally a merchant, so it was not surprising that he knew about this. Chu Mu. Chu Mu said, and did not make up any fake name. Chu Mu. Jin Yuanbao repeated in his heart, and his mind spun quickly. However, he found that he did not have an impression of a high-level martial saint expert by the name of Chu Mu. One should know that Jin Yuanbao was very knowledgeable and knew many people. Basically, he knew all the mid-level and high-level martial saints who had some reputation. Although he did not know him, Jin Yuanbao did not show any unusual expression. Instead, he used his skillful communication skills to get close to him. In terms of communication skills and eloquence, Chu Mu couldn't compare to Jin Yuanbao no matter how hard he tried. If it were anyone else, Jin Yuanbao may have dug out all of their family's wealth and unknowingly handed over their 18 generations of ancestors. However, Chu Mu would not. Although he was not as eloquent as Jin Yuanbao, Chu Mu was very alert and direct when talking with him. He did not feel embarrassed or awkward at all. He said what he could and did not say what he could not say. This made Jin Yuanbao, who had a glib tongue, very depressed. What he was most afraid of was meeting such a resolute person. If he did not say anything, he would not say it even if he was beaten to death. The others were also listening. Many of them knew Jin Yuanbao and knew his ability. They also wanted to find out more about Chu Mu. However, they did not expect Jin Yuanbao to be defeated. And the way to defeat him was very simple and direct. He said what he wanted to say and did not say what he did not want to say. He did not feel embarrassed at all. All of a sudden, everyone had an even deeper impression of Chu Mu. Unfortunately, Chu Mu was equipped with the endless heavenly puppet, so they could not see what he looked like. Moreover, with the lesson of the previous people who had their spirit power cut off, as well as the tyrannical aura that Chu Mu and the other three erupted, no one dared to casually spy on them. Everyone's attention seemed to have shifted to Chu Mu and the other three. Although Jin Yuanbao did not find out any useful information, he still chatted with Chu Mu. He was very knowledgeable and eloquent, so it was very interesting to talk with him. Chu Mu was also very happy that Jin Yuanbao did not try to find out more about him. As they chatted, time passed and the blood-red shield suddenly flickered. Chapter 1554. The crimson light barrier started to fluctuate. Layers of ripples began to spread out, attracting the crowd's attention. A buzzing sound began to sound. It gradually became more intense. It was as if a swarm of bees were flying around their ears. The crimson light barrier started to fluctuate violently. Then, with a popping sound, the crimson light barrier shattered like a bubble, revealing the scenery behind the light barrier. In an instant, the crowd was unable to shift their gazes away. Numerous towers stood in great numbers. They were tall and short. Although they appeared to be disorderly, they were actually arranged in picturesque disorder. Most importantly, every single tower gave the crowd a feeling of being completely undamaged. That's right, every single tower was completely undamaged. It was completely different from the towers and palaces they had encountered before. It was as if they had been deliberately preserved. Furthermore, every single tower was covered by a layer of invisible energy that emitted faint fluctuations. That invisible energy was like a layer of protection that protected the towers. Even after so many years, they had not been damaged by the corrosion of time. What did that mean? The crowd was very clear. Precisely because they were clear, their eyes grew brighter and brighter. An undamaged pagoda and an invisible protective power meant that there were definitely treasures inside the pagoda. According to past experience, the deeper one went into the 10,000 ancient sacred city, the greater the opportunity one would obtain. Naturally, the better the treasures one would obtain. Without needing to say much, everyone knew what they should do next. One by one, they began to move. If it weren't for the fact that they were unable to fly, they would all wish to grow several pairs of wings and fight to collect all the treasures in the towers before the others. Even though they were unable to fly, they all erupted with their full speed. Their bodies turned into rays of light that instantly streaked across the sky and rushed toward the towers. There were so many towers that it was hard to tell how many of them there were. Wanting to collect all the treasures in all of them was just wishful thinking. Not to mention all of them, even collecting the treasures in 2 or 3 towers would be extremely difficult. Due to the fact that there were a lot of people, and the fact that every single tower had a protective energy around it, if one wanted to obtain the treasures in the towers, one would first have to break through the protective energy. Chu Mu and the others naturally did not fall behind the others. They erupted with the speed of a peak 7-star martial saint. Turning into rays of light, they rushed toward one of the towers. At this moment, there were still many towers. There was no need to fight over them. That would only be a waste of time. It seemed that everyone had the same idea, so there was no conflict. Chu Mu, Gu Luankong and the other 2 separated. If the 4 of them worked together, they might be able to break through the defensive barrier of a pagoda faster and obtain the treasures inside. However, they might only be able to obtain one treasure. If the 4 of them separated, they might have to spend more time to break through the defensive barrier. But once they broke through, they would be able to obtain more treasures. At this time, everyone was concerned about the tower. No one would fight for it unless the tower was not enough. Although they were separated, the towers that Chu Mu and the other three chose were adjacent to each other, so it was easier for them to take care of each other. The two-sword light leaped out and landed in his hands. He slashed out, and the cross-sword light was incomparably bright. The cold silver cross-sword light directly slashed at the invisible protective force of the tower. Immediately, the sword light shattered, and the invisible protective force of the tower stirred up layers of ripples, spreading out and then disappearing. Chu Mu continued to attack with his sword. The power of every attack was concentrated into one, and he attacked the same point. Layers of ripples spread out from the point where the swords landed. As Chu Mu attacked with his sword, he used his soul power to sense it carefully. The protective force of the tower could be said to be strong, but it could also be said to be weak. It was all relative. If he used his real body's power, he would not be able to shake it at all, let alone cause ripples. But now, he was using the heavenly puppet, which had the power of a peak 7-star martial sage. It was enough to shake the protective force of the tower. As he attacked with his sword, Chu Mu calculated silently. After his primordial spirit was formed, his calculation ability had increased. After his primordial spirit was raised to the peak of grade 2, his calculation ability had increased further. At this time, there were already people who had broken through the protective force of the tower and rushed into the tower. These people were basically 9-star martial sages, and there were also some 8-star martial sages. Star-breaking sword technique. Star-breaking sword technique. In an instant, Chu Mu stabbed out with his two swords. A spot of starlight gathered at the tip of the swords, and a terrifying power was compressed at a high intensity. When it stabbed into the protective force, the spot of starlight did not dissipate, and it gradually spread out. The spot of starlight rotated continuously and moved inwards. A powerful force was contained within, and it was waiting for the best opportunity to attack. Under the impact of the starlight, the invisible protective force caved in inward. It was as if it could be broken with a single poke, but it stubbornly resisted. Seizing the instant opportunity, an extremely condensed sword light pierced out silently from the clouds and mist. It pierced through the clouds and the void and stabbed into the starlight. With the push of the force, the power of the starlight exploded, and it tore through the invisible protective force around it. The power of the cloud-piercing sword technique was unleashed. There was a slight sizzling sound, and the sword pierced through the invisible protective force. The hand holding the sword exerted force, and the sword slashed to the side, directly cutting a hole in the invisible protective force. Chu Mu turned into a stream of light, and entered the tower through the hole. Among the many towers there were 3 levels: low, middle, and high. The lowest tower was about 30 meters tall, the middle tower was about 40 meters tall, and the highest tower was 50 meters tall. The tower that Chu Mu entered was only 30 meters tall, and it was the lowest of the 3 types of towers. The 30 meters tall tower was 25 meters tall, and it was completely made of green gold stone. It looked very hard. Chu Mu tried to cut it with his sword, and when the tip of the sword cut through the stone, there was an ear-piercing sound, and countless dazzling sparks flew out. So hard! Chu Mu was shocked. After thinking for a while, he was not that surprised. The ancient sacred city was a remnant of the ancient era, and with one look, one could tell that it had gone through countless battles. After so many battles, it was not damaged, and there were so many towers in the central area. It was like an inheritance, and it was enough to show how powerful it was. These towers could go through countless years without being damaged. Other than their defensive power, the materials they were made of were not to be underestimated. That was why they could not be damaged under the erosion of time. However, the materials of the towers were not what Chu Mu was most interested in. With a leap, his body shot up. His speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, Chu Mu was 25 meters tall. He landed on the edge of the tower, and with strength in his hands, he pushed open the tightly shut door. The moment the door opened, an extremely dense heaven and earth yuan qi immediately rushed over like a cool breeze, making Chu Mu feel very comfortable. The heaven and earth yuan qi was very pure, and it did not contain any blood qi, nor did it contain any impurities. Chu Mu, who was in the heaven wasteland heavenly puppet, felt as though all the pores on his body had opened up, and he could breathe to his heart's content. Suddenly, a sense of danger appeared and attacked him, causing Chu Mu's expression to turn cold. With a thought, the heaven wasteland heavenly puppet quickly moved, leaving behind a lifelike figure on the spot. After Chu Mu completely controlled the heaven wasteland heavenly puppet, he could use the sword chi shadow movement technique with the heavenly puppet's body. The heavenly puppet's shadow was instantly torn apart by 3 beams of black light, and it disappeared. Chu Mu also caught sight of the attacker in an instant. It was a jet-black monster that was more than 2 meters tall. It looked like a werewolf, but it was even more ferocious. Its qi and blood were extremely strong, and it was filled with evil qi. It was extremely ferocious. Its body was not made of fur, but black scales that reflected a jet-black luster. It seemed to have an astonishing defense. This werewolf monster's eyes were scarlet, and they shone with a scarlet luster that was more than 3 inches long. Those who lacked courage would feel their hearts and primordial spirits tremble when they met its gaze. Not to mention meeting its gaze, just the extremely ferocious evil qi on its body was enough to make many people feel terrified. They could not even use 70% of their strength. Chu Mu's willpower was firm, and with the eternal sword will, he was not easily affected. However, he was also very surprised and did not know what kind of monster this was. No matter what kind of monster it was obviously not friendly to him. The strong murderous intent made Chu Mu understand that this was an enemy. Moreover, the powerful and ferocious evil qi made Chu Mu realize that this was a very powerful enemy that had the strength of a peak 7-star martial sage. In terms of strength, it was comparable to the heavenly puppet that he controlled. However, this was also the first time that Chu Mu had seen this monster. He searched his memory but could not find anything related to it. Therefore, it was an unknown monster. The unknown often meant that there were variables. Chu Mu did not know what kind of monster this was, so he had to treat it with caution. The monster did not stop after its attack failed. It turned into a black light, raised its sharp claws and clawed at Chu Mu again. The claws were extremely sharp. Even from a distance, Chu Mu could feel the sharpness of the claws through the heavenly puppet. It could easily make one's blood coagulate, and one's limbs become stiff and numb, unable to move. He did not know if the heavenly puppet's powerful defense could withstand the attack of the claws. However, Chu Mu would not try. If it really could not withstand the claws, the heavenly puppet would be injured. The sharp claws came at an extremely fast speed. Chu Mu's vision was enhanced by the heavenly puppet, and he had reached the peak of a 7-star martial sage. Otherwise, he would not have been able to see it. He attacked with both swords. The heavenly puppet's swords were made of better materials. They were harder and tougher than the heavenly puppet's body. It should not be afraid of the opponent's claws. Chu Mu's swords were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had slashed out hundreds of times. Densely packed silver sword light wrapped around the opponent. Some of the sword light was shattered by the opponent's sharp claws, while some of the sword light slashed the opponent's body and broke into pieces. Chu Mu was surprised to find that after his attacks hit the monster's body, they did not cause any obvious damage. They only left some white scratches on its scales, and sparks flew. Could it be that this monster-like lichen had a body of steel? Chapter 1555. What kind of monster is that? What a terrifying monster! All sorts of exclamations could be heard from the various towers. Everyone was shocked. Just like Chu Mu, they had also encountered a monster. To gain something, one had to pay a price. The towers and palaces that they had encountered in the past were all damaged. Even if they weren't damaged, they wouldn't encounter any danger. Right now, they were at the center of the ancient sacred city. Here, there were treasures everywhere. There were countless pagodas, and each of them represented a fortune. Maybe on the way to the center, there would be some treasures that were comparable to the pagodas in the center, but there were very few of them. For example, the puppet underground palace that Chu Mu and the others had entered and the seven-colored ring primordial spirit defense secret technique that they had obtained along the way were not inferior to the opportunities in the towers in the center of the ancient sacred city. Chu Mu also didn't understand why there weren't any outside. In the towers in the center, if one wanted to obtain treasures, they had to face strong enemies. Perhaps this was a trap set by the ancient people. Only by defeating strong enemies could one obtain the treasures. Gu Wankong and the other two had also broken through the defensive power of the towers. When they entered the towers, they also encountered strong enemies. Fortunately, they were all equipped with heavenly puppet. They were strong enough to fight against the enemies. Intense battles were taking place in every tower. However, some of the battles in the towers ended as soon as they started. This was because those who entered the towers were all 9-star saint. The defensive power of the 30-meter tower was equivalent to that of a 7-star saint. The guardian of the tower was at the peak of a 7-star saint. Compared to an 8-star saint or a 9-star saint, the difference was obvious. After killing the guardians and obtaining the treasures, these experts left the towers and went to the other towers. Chu Mu was still in an intense battle with the black werewolf monster. From the beginning of the battle, dozens of breaths had passed. Every breath was extremely dangerous. During this period, Chu Mu's heavenly puppet was scratched by the black werewolf's claws. Sparks flew. Although it wasn't torn apart, it was left with 3 claw marks. Fortunately, it wasn't deep and the heavenly puppet could recover slowly. In the following battles, Chu Mu became even more cautious. His body movement and footwork improved, and his sword Chi Shadow became even more powerful. The black werewolf's defense was extremely strong. Ordinary attacks simply couldn't break it. Chu Mu had no choice but to use his sword move. The sword style brought about a threat to the black werewolf. This thing was incomparably savage, but it seemed to possess intelligence that wasn't simple. It didn't clash head-on with Chu Mu. Moreover, its battle technique was astonishing, as if it was born for battle and slaughter. After fighting with the black werewolf, Chu Mu's battle experience also increased. This was the first time he had encountered such a powerful monster. Of course, if Chu Mu had the strength of an 8-star saint, it wouldn't be difficult for him to kill this black werewolf. After all, under the absolute disparity in strength, techniques would be infinitely weakened. Chu Mu was immersed in his battle with the black werewolf. For the time being, he couldn't do anything to the black werewolf. Similarly, the black werewolf couldn't do anything to Chu Mu. It was reduced to being Chu Mu's sparring partner, improving his body movement and sword skills. At this time, a ray of light flew over from the distance. That sword light was incomparably cold, causing Chu Mu's heart to tremble. His hair stood on end, and he subconsciously used his sword Chi Shadow to dodge to the side. This sword light's main target wasn't Chu Mu, but the black werewolf. The black werewolf had an extremely high perception of danger. It immediately dodged, but it was still a step too late. That cold sword light's speed was extremely fast, and it slashed through the black werewolf with terrifying power. Just as the black werewolf was killed, Chu Mu made a prompt decision and quickly rushed out of the tower far away. Only then did his killing intent fade. Without looking back, Chu Mu erupted with all his speed and rushed to the other towers. Needless to say, the black werewolf's death meant that the treasures within were definitely taken away. Only when that killing intent completely disappeared did Chu Mu stop. Within the heavenly puppet, his expression was ice-cold. That black werewolf was an opportunity that belonged to him. And now, that opportunity had been forcibly snatched away by someone else. The person who snatched it was extremely powerful. Although that sword didn't contain any sword intent or sword force, it was extremely terrifying. It was a sword attack from a 9-star saint. In other words, the person who killed the black werewolf wasn't a sword saint, but a 9-star saint that cultivated in sword arts. An 8-star saint wasn't someone that Chu Mu could contend against, let alone a 9-star saint. Fortunately, Chu Mu had made a prompt decision to leave. Otherwise, once the black werewolf died, he might have been killed as well. Under normal circumstances, it wasn't difficult for a 9-star saint to kill a 7-star saint. Of course, Chu Mu still had a trump card. That was the Sword Sect spiritual seal. So far, he had used up 2 of the 5 chances. The remaining 3 chances were against a 9-star saint, an unparalleled expert, and Bai Ling, who was suspected to be a great emperor or a holy emperor. After entering the ancient sacred city, Chu Mu hadn't thought of it. It wasn't that he had forgotten, but he had done it on purpose. The 3 chances of using the Sword Sect's spiritual seal were his trump cards. They were his greatest trump cards so far. He wanted to enter the ancient sacred city to find opportunities and use his own strength to solve problems. That was the only way he could improve himself. Of course, if he really encountered a danger that he couldn't solve with his current strength, he would have to use it even if he didn't want to. Just now, Chu Mu had already memorized the aura of that 9-star saint. Not only did he snatch the treasures, he even wanted to kill him. This was a grudge that he had to avenge. However, the strength of a peak 7-star saint wasn't enough to fight against a 9-star saint. However, if he gathered Gu Luankong and the other 2 and set up the sword formation of the 4 symbols, they might be able to fight against the 9-star saint. With that thought, Chu Mu immediately moved towards a tower. That was Gu Luankong. Chu Mu was worried that Gu Luankong would encounter the same thing as him. That was why he decided to help Gu Luankong deal with the monster and get the treasures. Then, he would help Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun. After getting the treasures, the 4 of them would work together. If they worked together, they would be strong. His previous thinking was wrong. Seeing Chu Mu arrive, Gu Luankong didn't ask why. The 2 of them worked together to attack. Gu Luankong's opponent wasn't a werewolf. However, it was also a ferocious-looking monster. It exuded a strong evil aura that made one's heart tremble. Originally, Gu Luankong was fighting the black monster to a draw. However, after Chu Mu joined the battle, the black monster was suppressed and Gu Luankong gained the upper hand. Chu Mu's sword was extremely sharp. Moreover, he had the intention of ending the battle as quickly as possible. Every time he used a sword style, its power was extremely powerful and shocking. Dao Cutter Sword Move. Chu Mu realized that the black monster didn't seem to be affected by the Dao Cutter Sword Move. However, the Dao Cutter Sword Move was still very powerful. The sword of Gu Luankong's heavenly puppet was also made of a special material. It had shocking toughness and sharpness. Chaotic Space 10 Moves. Cloud-piercing sword move. With the 2 of them working together, the black monster was severely injured. Then, they crossed their sword light and killed the monster. The black monster disappeared immediately. In midair, there was a black pearl that was spinning. The pearl exuded a strong dark aura. It was very shocking. "It's yours," Chu Mu said. Gu Luankong didn't say anything. He just kept the black pearl. The 2 of them left quickly and went to another tower nearby. Lian Hongyun was fighting an intense battle with a monster. Lian Hongyun was slightly weaker than Gu Luankong. Therefore, she could only fight to a draw with the monster. She was at a slight disadvantage. If she was at a slight disadvantage, it was enough to show how powerful the monster was. If it was another 7-star saint, they might not be able to get the treasure. Instead, they might be killed by the monster. Chu Mu and Gu Luankong joined the battle. The 3 of them surrounded the monster. The monster was at a disadvantage. After a few moves, it was hit by Chu Mu's 2 swords. It was immediately injured. Gu Luankong's sword also hit the monster. Lien Hongyun used her ultimate move to injure the monster. After a few moves, the monster was killed by the three of them. The monster disappeared. The treasure it left was a black bracelet. It wasn't big, but it gave people a heavy feeling. This bracelet naturally belonged to Lien Hongyun. She kept it without checking what it was. The three of them left the tower immediately. When they were about to go to Yang Zhantian's tower, they realized that Yang Zhantian was already rushing towards them. "Old Yang, did you kill the monster by yourself?" Lien Hongyun asked when she saw him. Chu Mu and Gu Luankong also looked at him. If Yang Zhantian killed the monster by himself, it would mean that the monster was weak. However, based on their experience, it didn't seem to be the case. Could it be that Yang Zhantian was stronger? Even if Yang Zhantian was stronger, he couldn't be more powerful than a 7-star saint. When he controlled the heavenly puppet, its power was only at the peak of 7-star saint. How could Yang Zhantian, who was at the peak of 7-star saint, kill such a monster by himself? Even Chu Mu wouldn't be able to kill it that easily. No, it was taken by an 8-star saint. Yang Zhantian's voice was filled with anger. His face couldn't be seen, but it was obvious that he was furious. 8-star saint rank, do you remember his aura? Chu Mu's voice carried a sliver of coldness. Yes, Yang Zhantian said. Good. There was a 9-star saint who tried to snatch it. If I didn't retreat immediately, I would have been attacked too. Chu Mu said, an 8-star saint and a 9-star saint. Now, the four of us will move together. We can set up a formation at any time. If we encounter any 8-star saint or 9-star saint, we will kill them without mercy. Okay, Yang Zhantian said immediately. They deserve to die, Lien Hongyun shouted. Gu Luankong nodded. Let's go. Chu Mu didn't say anything else. He led Gu Luankong and the other two and rushed towards a tower that still had some protective energy. With the four of them working together, they quickly broke through the protective energy of the tower and entered the tower. The tower was only 30 meters tall, and the monster's strength was only at the peak of the 7-star martial saint level. Under the joint attack of the four of them, it only took them 3 breaths to slash it 7 to 8 times and kill it directly.